All right. Okay, December 4th, 2017 meeting of the Anne Arundel County Council is now in session. Please stand for invocation. Remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Trumbauer, you have the con.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I get into the prayer, I just want to say a quick thing that Mr. Walker and myself had the honor to attend the inauguration today of the new Annapolis mayor. And you may think I look extra fancy today. It's because I'm wearing a lapel pin, and it's the city seal. So just on behalf of the council, I want to wish Mayor Buckley best of luck in his first term in office. So now, if you bow your heads. Dear Lord, for myself and several of my colleagues, we enter our final year in this office. Please give us the patience, the compassion, and understanding to execute our office to the best of our ability, and help us not to forget that we were elected to represent our constituents, and we must at all times remember they have put their faith in us as their representatives. Please help us to make wise decisions. God bless this council. Amen.
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 I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to take this golden opportunity once again to introduce myself. My name is John Grasso on behalf of myself and staff, and of course the entire council, but most of all on behalf of the people of Anne Arundel County. I'd like to welcome everyone to tonight's meeting. Sincerely hope and trust that you find it a little bit amusing and informative at the same time. And by the way, I'd like everyone to acknowledge that Councilman Fink got a haircut today, okay? And with that being said, Madam Secretary, please read the ethics statement.
The Ethics Commission has asked that I advise you that under certain circumstances, members of the public may qualify as lobbyists when they testify before the County Council. If so, the law requires that certain information be filed with the Ethics Commission. The Chairman of the Ethics Commission has asked that those present review the Ethics Commission information in the foyer of these chambers. If there are any questions about lobbying requirements, speakers should contact the Ethics Commission in the Heritage Office Complex on Riva Road.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. May I motion to suspend the rules to introduce and vote on resolutions 5117 out of order? So moved.
Second.
All right. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Mr. Trumbauer.
No.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
No.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Pruski.
No.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
4 in the affirmative, 3 in the negative. The motion to introduce and vote on Resolution 5117 out of order is defeated.
Okay. All right, Madam Secretary, please read resolution number 5117.
49.
Madam Secretary, please read resolution number 5117.
Point of order. The motion to read out of order has failed, has it not?
It failed.
You got to have 5?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, my bad. Okay, Madam Secretary, please read resolution number 4917.
Resolution number 4917, resolution electing a chairman of the County Council. Whereas Section 302A of the Anne Arundel County Charter provides that the County Council, at its regular meeting or session in December of each year, shall elect a chairman from its membership, now therefore be it resolved by the County Council of Anne Arundel County, Maryland, that it hereby elects Chris Trumbauer as chairman of the County Council.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is my resolution, which is maybe a little unusual that I'm recommending myself, but I'll give you a quick synopsis of why I'm doing that. I've served now 7 years on this council with a number of you. I've watched as each other member that I've been elected with back in 2010 has served as chair honorably, and I've supported you all. I feel like I've served this council well. I feel like I've been fair. I feel like I could run a good meeting, and I feel like despite I may have a different initial behind my name than some of you, a different letter, that I would be a good chair and I would represent this council well. If you're thinking that perhaps I would try and execute some crazy left-wing agenda, I can remind you that I actually serve as the council's representative to the Legislative Committee of Maryland Association of Counties. And as our colleague, Mr. Walker, sits on that as well, he can assure you that I always vote in the best interest of the council, even when that may not align with my personal views. So I take the responsibility very seriously. So I'm just asking for your indulgence. I would like, in my last year on this council, to be given a fair shot to serve as your chairman. If you don't feel that I would make a good chair, or you don't want to support the resolution, I understand that that may be an outcome, but I feel like I deserve a chance. So I'm putting forth this resolution. I appreciate your support. Thank you.
Okay. Any discussion? All right. Madam Secretary, please call the roll on resolution number 4917.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Nay.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Abstain.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Pruka.
Nay.
Mr. Grasso.
Nay.
3 in the affirmative, 3 in the negative, 1 abstention. Resolution number 4917 is defeated.
Okay. Madam Secretary, please read resolution number 5017.
Resolution number 5017, resolution electing a chairman of the county council. Whereas Section 302A of the Anne Arundel County Charter provides that the county council at its regular meeting or session in December of each year shall elect a chairman from its membership, now therefore be it resolved by the county council of Anne Arundel County, Maryland, that it hereby elects Derek J. Fink as chairman of the county council.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Fink.
Mr. That's
Mr. Smith.
If I can yield to
resolution.
Mr. Smith.
Before, I know Mr. Fink is probably getting ready to say, I know this is the last year of this body, and we got a number of different significant pieces of legislation over the next year. We got GDP, comp rezoning that we're going to enter into probably towards the end of this, and I've always felt that Mr. Fink has had a very sound and reasonable approach to his leadership when it comes to the chairmanship, and I respect him, and that's why I hope that he would be willing to serve this last year as the chairman of the county council. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Fink.
Well, I certainly appreciate my colleague's remarks. Mr. Smith, I have the same respect for him, but I have no intentions of serving as chairman of this council. So I would ask you to please abstain or vote no on this.
Okay. Madam Secretary, please call the roll on resolution number 5017.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Yes.
Mr. Walker.
No.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Abstain.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Pruka.
Abstain.
Mr. Grasso.
No.
3 in the affirmative, 2 in the negative, 2 abstentions. Resolution number 5017 is defeated.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Fink.
did you vote no for any particular reason?
You don't think I do? You don't think I do a good job?
You said either or.
You wanted it to fail. It failed.
You didn't think I'd do a good job.
It's that haircut, man. I keep trying to tell you that. Okay. Moving forward. Madam Secretary, please read resolution number 5117.
Resolution number 5117, resolution electing a chairman of the county council. Whereas Section 302A of the Anne Arundel County Charter provides that the county council at its regular session or meeting or session in December of each year shall elect a chairman from its membership, now therefore be it resolved by the county council of Anne Arundel County that it hereby elects Michael A. Peruka as chairman of the county council.
All right. Any discussion? Okay. Madam Secretary, please call the roll on resolution number 5117.
Mr. Trumbauer.
No.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
No.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Pruski.
No.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
4 in the affirmative, 3 in the negative. Resolution 5117 is passed.
All right. Congratulations, Mr. Peruka. You get to be the man beating on the drum over here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr.
Past chairman.
Past Chairman.
Past
Sorry.
chairman.
I think we have a little presentation for you, if I may. Appreciating your service and your eminent soliloquies that you presented here. We want to present you with this gavel for your service for the chairmanship of the Anne Arundel County Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peruka. Appreciate it. Okay.
Thank you very much, sir.
And then you taking over the deal.
Thank you very much. I will strive to do my duty as best as I can. Madam Secretary, please read Resolution 5217.
Resolution number 5217, resolution electing a vice chairman of the county council. Whereas Section 302A of the Anne Arundel County Charter provides that the county council at its regular meeting or session in December of each year shall elect a chairman and a vice chairman from its membership. Now therefore, be it resolved by the county council of Anne Arundel County, Maryland, that it hereby elects Jerry Walker as vice chairman of the county council.
Is there any discussion?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Smith.
Again, since this is the last year, obviously, Mr. Walker has a significant amount of legislative experience, and so having him as a backup has always been a good thing for this council. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Any further discussion? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on Resolution 5217.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker. Aye. Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Resolution number 5217 is adopted.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I think we have the Salary Commission is going to present a report.
While they're coming up, just a point of order, do we need to withdraw 53?
Since that's on the agenda.
It would be cleaner.
Yeah,
have a motion
please. Now we're going to withdraw 5317.
Thank you, Mr. Grasso. Do we need to vote on that?
No.
Okay, thank you. You're good.
Someone can take this chair.
The Salary Commission,
Good evening. My name is Robin Clark, and I'm Chair of the Commission.
thank
Hear
you.
me? It's a pleasure to be here this evening. Thank you for the opportunity to address the Council. Congratulations, Mr. Chairman, and
Thank you.
congratulations to the new Vice Chair. We're pleased to present the report and recommendations of the 2017 Salary Standard Commission. I'm here today with my fellow commissioners, Commissioner Steelman, Commissioner Whitney, Commissioner Devilbus, Commissioner Lee, Commissioner Stanton, and my Vice Chairman, Commissioner Atkinson. Can you hear me? Okay. Thanks. You're too close. Okay. I want to extend a thank you to Joanne Gray and to Susan Klein, who are invaluable support to our work. It's the duty of the Commission to recommend compensation and allowances for members of the County Council. Thank you to all of you for providing us with this chance to do this important work through your appointment. I'd like to share with you how impressed I have been with the sincerity, enthusiasm, and commitment of this very able and talented group with me on the Commission. You have been provided with our full report, I trust. We tried to be very thorough with regard to our recommendations and also the conversations and deliberations and thinking behind them. So today we're just going to briefly offer an overview and a few highlights of the recommendations and respond to any questions that you have. As described in my letter of introduction, while our charge is complete upon delivering you the report, we would be happy to conduct any follow-up or any inquiries that you may have. In some ways, the conclusions of this commission mirror those of the 2013 commission, of which I was also a member. Both commissions recommend an increase to the salaries of the county council. Both commissions recommend certain allowances in order for council members to do their duties. The difference that I would note in this 2017 commission, however, is the sense of urgency. We all have a strong sense of the importance of increasing the salaries at this time in the next term, that is. I hope that this sense of urgency is communicated through the report and through our presentation this evening. I'll just begin with a brief overview. The compensation of council members since it was last increased in 2003 has fallen behind several comparator measures that we reviewed. Those would include the increases in salaries of other county employees, including represented and non-represented employees, the salary of the county executive, the median household incomes of Anne Arundel County residents, as those have increased since 2003. The salaries of the council members have remained the same. Finally, we consulted the the salaries of council members in other charter counties. Many of which have increased, especially those in neighboring counties of Baltimore and Howard. In addition to the sort of stagnation of the Anne Arundel County Council salaries, the overall compensation of the council members has been cut. So cuts to the allowances and benefits includes the termination of the county vehicle privileges, removal of the mileage allowance, an extension of the vesting requirements for the pension system, an increase to a 100% contribution required for council members to obtain health coverage through the county. Without a mileage or tech allowance, we are assured that council members are subsidizing their outreach and constituent services that we as residents expect of them through their own means. In addition, changes to the pension and health benefits really affect a decrease in the total compensation package akin to that of a salary cut. Our recommendations are for a $2,000 one-time increase in the next year of every council member's salary, and to an increase of the same amount to the vice chair and chair's salary. And in addition, on top of that, a 2% increase each year annually over the next 4 years. As far as allowances and benefits, we recommend a cell phone or internet allowance of $100 a month and a transportation allowance of $350 a month. On page 4 of the report, if you have it in front of you, we tell a story of the salaries, where they're currently at. We also describe how there have been 2 past commissions, such as this one, to recommend increases. Neither of those increases have been enacted. There was also, in addition, in the past 3 rotations of commissions, one commission, I believe, held in 2009, that didn't recommend a salary increase, but at the same time, they recommended a maintenance of the salaries and a maintenance of the whole compensation package. As I've described, that hasn't continued as many of the benefits have been pulled back. On page 8 of the report, you'll see in more detail some of the comparators that we looked at, including Baltimore and Howard counties, where council members are earning about $25,000 more per year than council members in Anne Arundel County. We also describe their increases that have been received by Anne Arundel County employees and the county executive since 2003. We find that our county's legislators really deserve an increase, and we support and encourage their service, and we want to support and encourage their service and their constituent services through a salary increase and through the allowances that we've described. At this point, I would like to turn it over to my vice chairman to speak about one other suggestion that we've included in the report.
Good evening.
Good evening.
And that recommendation deals with the county charter. We have had significant discussion about the charter. As it was discussed, the increase in salary that we haven't seen since 2003 here in Anne Arundel County, and the charter actually hasn't changed since 1964. And the base salary listed currently in the county charter is a minimum of $2,100 per year for council members. We don't have the authority to change the charter. However, we do believe, and it may be outside of the purview of this report, however, we did discuss the pursuit of a charter amendment that would update the language and current minimum salary of the county council to $36,000. The commission recommends this change to protect against reductions to council member salaries in the future, and we understand that this change would have to be brought before the voters by way of resolution and passed by the county council. If appropriate, the commission would recommend that the council refer this topic for consideration as part of the 10-year charter review process, or any council member could put it forward to have in the polls at this year's election. So with that, I appreciate your time.
Yeah, And just in conclusion, one of the reasons why we set forth that suggestion is, again, to underline how strongly we believe change is necessary. So using any tools at your disposal, we do urge the council to adjust the salary upwards, to increase the compensation package to a point which is fair and reasonable considering the duties incumbent upon a council member. One possible avenue would be change to the charter or reference of this subject to the Charter Commission, excuse me. Another, as we understand on the commission, is to enact even a piece of this report. So while we consider different ways to make a recommendation, such as including essentially the allowances within the salary itself, we decided to keep those separate to allow the commission, or to allow the council or an individual council member to introduce legislation on one of these topics. We're really hoping to provide you with as many tools as possible, as many options as possible to reach that ultimate goal.
Thank you very much, Ms. Clark and Mr. Atkinson, the members of the commission. Thank you very much for your work. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Mr. Smith?
Quick question. Was the commission unanimous in the recommendation, or was there dissent as well?
Yeah, so we took a final vote at the end of all of our smaller discussions about salary and other individual pieces of the recommendation. And our final vote was unanimous to adopt all the recommendations.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir, Mr. Trumbo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
okay.
John, it's tough to let go, isn't it?
It is. But I appreciate the help.
So, Robin, while you were speaking, I was dividing my attention a little bit, trying to listen to you, but also going through the report. And I just have to say, this is a very well done and thorough job that you guys have put together, and I think it's very thoughtful, the way that you've put it together and the way that you've broken it up. And I just wanted to go on the record. I appreciate the work. I know this didn't come about easily or quickly, so thank you guys for taking your charge seriously and putting forth some very well thought out recommendations. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Trumbo. Mr. Gressa.
Yeah, once again, too, what you folks did was really good, because you're not getting paid for it. It's your community service, and, we well appreciate that. One thing, I know when the council came and we had this brought before us, the thing that kind of bothers, and I look at other counties and cities for that matter, and I look at the nightmare that Baltimore City is and what those people are getting paid. They should do the job for free. Prince George's County, I don't think is any better, and the phenomenal salary that they're getting is another disgusting thing that I just can't believe. And I can tell you, as a councilman, I'm honored to be a councilman. I just can't believe people actually voted for me. So, to actually win the election, you know what I mean? And to me, I'm not speaking for everybody up here, that I would pretty much do the job for free. Because I just figure it's just an honor to be able to represent people, and it's your way of giving back to the community. So sometimes and again, I'm speaking for myself, and the funny thing about it, that during the campaign times, folks, probably most people know that I funded my own campaign, pretty much of it, and I gave my salary back on top of it. It's not because I don't like money. I like money just like everybody else does. I wanted people just to believe that someone actually cared about them. And if I'm not taking your money and I fund my own campaign, what could you possibly say about me? Well, soon to believe there's still people talking trash about me. It really doesn't matter. But the issue is how I felt inside. And, for people to turn around, and I had a philosophy that everybody was already paying their bills to begin with before they became a councilman. And to count on an election to pay your bills just tells me how foolish a person could possibly be. So that leads me with the second point and say, well, then, if you're already paying your bills before you became a councilman, then how about all the money you're getting? Isn't that something that maybe you should be giving back into the community? And you can make that argument and say, well, if I wasn't a councilman, then I could be working another part-time job doing something else. I guess that's an argument you can make there too. But I just wanted to make it clear out there that I have a hard time supporting something like this because, like I said, I just think it's an honor to be the councilman and that people believed enough in me to cast that vote. So if I don't go with your recommendations or something like that, I don't want you to be offended by any means, because I think you did a phenomenal job. And I also remember, too, that just a few years back that the council got all these things. And I remember myself and several of the council people, we came in here determined to take away everything from the council. And that meant special dinners, that meant cell phones, that meant car allowance, that meant everything. And we came down to rock bottom. This council operates on virtually nothing. And sometimes I kick myself in the butt because I turn around and think, you know, I want a cookie back there or something. We don't have a budget for that because we said that we weren't here to live off the people. As a matter of fact, one of my campaign tools going around was a big picture of a filet mignon with a lobster tail. And I went around to people and say, how do you feel about your council living off of your tax dollars, enjoying these lavish meals? And those people really got mad. And I know how I felt at that point. And so I know the council, we've done a very tight stream job, and I mentioned all the things that have been removed from the council. And it's just a question if the new council people want to go back to that road again. Because people, you know, the bottom line is, and I sum people up, I tell them, you pay me roughly $1,100 every 2 weeks. And if you really think about it, that's a heck of a nice paycheck every 2 weeks to get from the taxpayers on a part-time job. And yeah, I operate mine like it's full-time, don't get me wrong. It's like an extension of my rental business. But it's still a nice piece of change to come in for $1,100, and I just have a hard time to say, well, I want more. Me, I'll be out of office, but to say people should get more. And I guess don't want to lead into like a Baltimore City episode where people get so fat and lazy, get big salaries, and don't do anything for their people. So that's all I'm going to say.
Thank you, Mr. Grasso. Thank you again, members of the commission, Ms. Clark, Mr. Atkinson. Thank you very, very much. And thank you, Mr. Grasso, for your admonition. We appreciate it.
Not a problem.
Thank you.
If I might respond.
Sure.
I just want to clarify that this commission actually began with that very concept, that it is an honor to serve as a councilman. And that was our starting point. We were also highly attuned to the idea of how the residents of this county perceive these offices, what they might find acceptable remuneration for the services. It was our ultimate conclusion that the increases in this report are neither excessive, they are not overkill in any way. They are very, very much base, very much stripped down. We strongly believe, and we are unanimous in this, and we've been through about, 15 versions of what's written here today, circulated via email. Everyone very diligently reading and providing me with edits, that without an increase, we are undermining the ability of council members to serve their community. We are not supporting the vision that our residents have of the responsibilities of this office. We believe that the constituents deserve the highest caliber representation. And in this day and age, you need a technology and you need a car in order to do that. We believe that without putting the council on a track to increasing salaries and to providing these allowances, we are going to narrow the pool of residents who are able to afford serving on the council. And that threatens the ability of the voters to elect a body that they find representative. We also think that a failure to enact these recommendations is a failure to support the maintenance of the council's integrity. And I don't think I need to describe that in any more detail. So we do urge the enactment of the full report. And I just want to say, I hear you, and we have heard you, and we have started at that point. That was our starting point, and this is the point that we're finishing at.
Well, thank you again. Did any other commission members like to speak?
I would just like to recommend that Mr. Grasso read the report. I think he may find it enlightening. And again, while the county charter, I think, was intent upon keeping the compensation at a reasonable rate for our elected officials, I don't think that any of our charter government members believed or anticipated that they wanted a government that was simply, represented by those who were independently wealthy and could afford to volunteer their time to county governance. I think that we've discussed that at great length, and I think we all believe that. So thank you.
Mr. Smith.
Yeah, I'm simply going to say, I know, just to clarify for, and to agree with Mr. Grasso on the full-timeness of this job. I know folks would assume we work like 2 or 3 days a week, but I will tell you, probably all of us up here work 30 to 40 hours a week at this job. It is literally a full-time job. And I know citizens see the 2-day-a-week requirement and the 1 day on the charter, but if you are doing this job successfully and the way it's intended, it is a full-time job. I think all of us spend make many sacrifices to serve honorably in this position, and it is a lot of work. It really is a lot of work. So it's, despite how you feel about the recommendations, I'm just clarifying for the audience and for the public, it is a full-time job. And if you ever run for this seat, you will, and if you think that you're going to work 3 days a week like I did when I got appointed, you will be shocked. You will be shocked. So
Still came back.
So I just wanted to say, I know.
Glutton for punishment.
I know. So I just want to say that for the record. It is literally a full-time job. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Anybody else? Once again, we thank you and commend you for your work. We appreciate it very, very much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you all for your service.
Thank you. We'll now invite members of the audience who signed up before the meeting to address the council briefly on any subject not included on the printed agenda, and remarks will be limited to 2 minutes. The following persons, please come to the table and take a seat. C.J. Mushaw, Jim Arbogast, Matt Johnson, Melanie Hastwig Davis, and Lori Carter, please. I don't have your microphone control here, but Madam Secretary does, and she's going to enforce the 2 minutes on you. So apologies in advance for that, but we hope you can keep your remarks to 2 minutes. Can we start with Mr. Mushaw? Oh, Ms. Mushaw, excuse me, C.J. Mushaw.
Sure. On December 1st, the Capitol reported that the state's attorney office determined that a graphic language and threats of physical violence posted by a student at Southern High School towards another student, a transgender youth at that high school, on a Snapchat story called Confederate Lives Matter in October did not constitute a crime. The photos posted included one of the student wearing a hood that resembled a Ku Klux Klan garment. It can be a little hard to see through the cracks in my phone because I'm on a budget, but this is the image of our youth in a Ku Klux Klan resembling hood. So I wanted to further report that from that article, they shared that no crime occurred because both students participated in the conversation on Snapchat, and the student who made the statements was never told to stop by the victim, according to the police report obtained by the Capitol. Today, the student targeted was visited by a CPS worker and someone who works with the police department, as the student was told, to discuss their experiences at Southern High. After some time, one of the adults told the student that was targeted by the initial incident to cut the fucking bullshit. This is the support that our students at Anne Arundel County school system are getting. We plan on attending the school board meeting this Wednesday, and we've been encouraged to do so by members of the school board and other authorities in the council. And the latest agenda shows that that meeting will be a closed meeting. So we wanted to make sure that everybody knows publicly what we're up against. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Arbogast?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As you know, I'm Jim Arbogast. I am the parent of Ryan, the son that was just talked about in that meeting. I'm here today, really, last meeting, I asked for help. I do thank the councilman from District 4 and District 6 for reaching out to me via email. Thank you very much. I do understand that some of you guys may not agree with what my son is going through. However, it's still a decision. It's a right. protected by the Constitution. Mr. Walker, my email address is still on that sheet. Feel free to reach out to me anytime you'd like, and we can have a conversation. However, I've been advised to reach out to the school board. I have reached out to the school board when this first came out. They're the ones who notified the police several weeks ago, and they left it there. They keep dumping it back onto Southern High School. Finally, I reached out to the Maryland Attorney General's office, the Chief of Civil Rights. She reached out to the Maryland State School Board and reached out to the regional superintendent. The superintendent emailed me and said he was highly encouraged by the Attorney General's office to reach out to me. I told him my goal, my plan, what I want to do, and I'll just read a quick comment from there, that my intent is not to call out the school or the principal or her staff. My intent moving forward is to encourage the school system to set a standard, a meaningful standard, well thought out for the transgender children. I understand that many of the staff members across Anne Arundel County Public Schools are not in the same mindset as I. However, I definitely understand where they're coming from. However, what I'm looking for is to protect these children. These children cross every race and ethnicity that there is, but these children are becoming targets of hatred and violence in schools, in many cases at home. Children should see school as a neutral space where children are free to learn and go on to do great things. They should also know that their teachers and staff at the schools will not judge them, and that the children are comfortable and confining with the staff, and that they are not bullied, threatened, or physically abused. So I'm asking here today is for this council to reach out to the school board and write their agenda and open up that meeting so I can at least conversate with these people and tell them what's going on versus them passing the buck down to the school.
Thank you, Mr. Arbogast. Thank you for being here tonight.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir, Mr.
Arbogast, thank you again for coming out. I did reach out to some of the school board members, and I wasn't happy with their responses either. But I will follow up again. I'm served on the school board prior to my service on the council, and I think it's ridiculous that they haven't brought it up, and I will assist you with trying to make sure that meeting's public.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Mr. Walker.
Mr. Arbogast, you said that the meeting was a closed meeting. Were you referring to a meeting that was coming up or one that was?
So the meeting coming up, based on their agenda, they're going to vote to have a closed session. Part of their bylaws, they are allowed to have a closed session to discuss certain topics. However, based on previous meetings they had, based on the internet search, once they had that closed meeting, to my knowledge, there is no public forum to have those conversations.
So my understanding, and Mr. Pruski might be able to correct me if I'm wrong, because he was a board member, but it's not unusual for them to have, as you stated, private sessions where they discuss like personnel issues and things like that.
Correct.
But they always, as I understood it, had a public portion of the meeting where one could come down and testify. Is that accurate?
They do if they've not changed the rules. Mr. Sheknovich is here as well from the school system, but I do believe they have.
I believe they always have a section of the meeting that is open to the public for public comment, where you have public testimony. I know that they do operate with things behind.
Well, unlike your
days.
council meeting, who the rules are very clear. There are rules on their website. It doesn't really state that. Like I said, your rules are very clear out there with time and all the rules and restrictions.
Yeah.
I couldn't find that. I did try to reach out to a couple of numbers, but I understand people are on vacation. Sometimes you just can't get a hold of people.
Sure.
But even getting response back from the regional superintendent, it's like pulling teeth.
Yeah, I will ask Mr. Sheknovich maybe when he comes down just to clarify, but I believe that they have there's sometimes a private section, and then there's always a public section where people can comment and give public testimony, just like we have here.
Thank you.
So, no problem.
Thank you again. Mr. Johnson, Matt Johnson.
Thank you. Matt Johnson, 1639 Chesapeake Lane, Edgewater, Mayo. Wanted to take the opportunity tonight to really thank the council for your work on tonight's agenda. There's a couple of bills regarding planning and zoning ordinances. And I just wanted to say it's a great start, but I think there's a lot more work to do next year, and I'd like to be of service in any way that I can. Specifically, I think the council should make absolutely clear that the general development plan that's being coordinated next year cannot just be a plan placed on a shelf. We need this to be a real plan, and it should be written with small area plans developed by your constituents in your communities. And to make that a real plan, I would really encourage this council to consider passing a resolution or an ordinance that requires, developers to describe in writing how their development will address all of the objectives of the GDP and the small area plans before being approved through the permitting process. Additionally, I spoke the last time about forest conservation and the inadequacies of the current Forest Conservation Act, and I'm back here, and I'll be back here next year as well to speak on that. Just wanted to let you know that the Chesapeake Bay Program Partnership has a model that estimates how much forest we have lost in every county across the Chesapeake Bay watershed. They estimate that we've lost 12,000 acres of forest in Anne Arundel County in the last 2 decades. To put that into water quality perspectives, that is akin to dumping 75 dump truck loads full of sediment into the bay every single year from now into the future. We're not going to regrow those forests. So I just simply ask that you consider a couple of these ideas next year and more that can allow us to start pushing back against all of the overdevelopment and get smarter about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Ms. Davis?
Permission to provide
Sure.
documents.
Don't give it to me. Thank you.
Thank you, okay. Melanie Hartwig Davis, 501 Bayview Point Drive, Edgewater. I want to commend the past county planning efforts. The 2002 Small Area Plan for Edgewater Mayo specifically seems thoroughly researched and thoughtfully considered, as there are a multitude of factors integrated into the adopted document. It is unfortunate, however, that this hard work and vision was not more utilized over the years. As we look to the future of Edgewater Mayo, I want to highlight for you several maps that I believe are illustrative to the challenges we have before us in determining the future vision of our county. Although I speak specifically about the Edgewater Mayo map, this is ultimately a county-wide concern. One of the maps that you'll see there are 2 maps about the Anne Arundel County growth tiers. One is from the proposed master plan for water supply and sewerage systems, which is slightly different from the 2013 approved Anne Arundel County map for growth tiers. In that, please highlight for yourself the red Tier 1 growth development areas. Contrast that now, please, to the map for priority for preservation of sub-watersheds, and also the priority map for restoration of sub-watersheds. I encourage you to look closely at how these maps overlap in terms of the information they provide. Please consider seriously the implications of this discrepancy. Peninsulas especially are vulnerable to our ever-rising waters and increasing damage due to storms. The county needs to come to terms with and accept with a passion the value of our ecosystem defenses. Embrace the importance of smart growth, or Anne Arundel County will be the next Houston. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hartwig Davis. Appreciate it. Ms. Carter.
Lori Carter, 312 Ferndale Road. This is a hard act to follow here. Everyone else seems, as you may recall, 2 weeks ago today, I buried my son, and it was no coincidence. And I'm very grateful that I believe God saw fit for Fran Phillips, the health officer, and Adrian Meckler and Sandra O'Neill. They spent some time with me, actually. They gave me about a half an hour of their time after I spoke for the 2 minutes. And I'm definitely grateful that they were here and that they made their crisis known, our crisis here in the county. And if I do nothing else, I stay present to keep this topic of grave nature at the forefront. I do believe that all issues are definitely valuable and worth bringing to your attention. But this is personal and hits close to home, but I'm sure that I'm not alone in that. And quite frankly, I'm just tired of it. So I know that it's going to be a long road ahead of us and that there's no easy solution to resolve. So many children and young adults dying. I tell some of my friends, I was a college student Maybe some skipped over that recreational, but drugs are not what they used to be. And what I wanted to do is I read over my letter from last 2 weeks ago, and I wanted you to get to know my son as he lost his life, and I'll keep coming back. And that's all I have for tonight.
Thank you very much,
Thank
ma'am.
you.
Appreciate your testimony.
Oh, and thank you for people who, we have a meeting coming up, so thank you for that.
Thank you,
Thank
ma'am.
you.
Appreciate it very much.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr.
If you don't mind, I was able to look at the Anne Arundel County Public website for the school system. Wednesday, December 6th at 10 a.m., they do recognitions, the PTA report, and then there's public comment. So you have the ability to sign up. There'll be a sign-in sheet right when you walk in, and then obviously share your information. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Mr. Grasso.
I'm going to go back to, let's see, Ms. Hartwig and Mr. Johnson. You know, we have the rain restoration, the Chesapeake Bay restoration, and I'm looking at your maps over here. Have you checked to see that some of these projects are already in the restoration that's coming your way?
Yes, we have. Sorry. Is there an extra one of those? I gave all my maps away.
There you go. Yeah, you can, my big thing is that I just want to make sure because we're really moving forward on their bay restoration project. I mean, when I talked to Mr. Phipps, he said we're probably at 70% plus of where we're supposed to be on our goals for the stormwater restoration fund. And I'm wondering, like some of these projects that you've circled down here, that maybe they are some of the ones that are probably Mr. Michelson and maybe Mr. Trumbauer might even know himself. But if they're not, then maybe it's something that we need to address and say something about. Have you checked any of them out?
So some of the specific ones in the Lock Haven would be a Glebe Heights, and then South Point is already built. They are in the, not in the red, but in the orange and the yellows,
Okay.
I believe. So the concern is that the left hand is not talking to the right hand. So the growth tiers are being created without consideration of other county data and research. I do not understand how Camp Letts would be included in any of the growth area, and it is in the red and the orange for the growth tier, or sorry, it's in the red for the growth tier map. So that's my point at this evening, is to have the right hand talk to the left hand and to truly value and understand why these preservation and restoration maps were created and hold to those.
No, I'm going on a limb here. You know, for that left hand, the right to talk to the right hand needs to have a Ben Franklin in it. That's really what needs to happen. Okay, just going to let you know that. And I know that's a very sharp statement, but I'm calling it what it is. And being I'm not the chairman anymore, I can say things like that.
Sir, I believe that Ben Franklin is short-sighted when it comes to when developers only have to pay 80% of the actual impact financially that it is to the county, and it's our tax dollars that are going to supplement them in the residual stormwater management that's going to have to take place when those developed forests and coverage are eliminated off of our peninsulas.
Couldn't agree with you more. Stay tuned to see the legislation I got coming your way, okay? It'll address those problems.
Thank you, Mr. Grasso. Mr. Walker?
Oh, I didn't have anything.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, my light's on, sorry.
If I may respond, Mr. Chairman?
If it's to what Mr. Grasso was asking.
It is, yes. In my day job, I work for the Chesapeake Bay Program Partnership, and my job is to track the progress of the counties across the watershed. So one, I would be willing to definitely come back here and tell this county how they're doing and work in council with the county offices to do that, show you where you are. But two, that progress that you referenced there, Mr. Grasso, that was as if our land use had not changed from 2010. So we've lost 6,000 acres of forest since 2010. We not only have to put all these restoration practices into the ground, we have to get off the treadmill. We have to stop the treadmill in its place and restore and preserve. That's why I keep coming back to the council and mentioning preservation as one way to meet our goals.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Is there anybody else who did not sign up and who wishes to speak? Please come up to the table and state your name and address. Anybody else? Seeing no movement, we'll move along. Is there any item that any council member would like to place on the agenda? Hearing none, may I have a motion that the partial reading of any bill, resolution, or minutes constitutes a reading of the
So
whole?
moved, Mr.
Second.
Chair.
All right, Madam Secretary, please read the minutes of November 20th, 2017.
The meeting was called to order by Chairman John Grasso at 7 p.m. and opened with the invocation given by Mr. Peruka, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance led by Boy Scout Troop 995 Arnold.
May I have a motion to approve the minutes of November 20th,
So
2017?
second, Mr. Chair.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The minutes of November 20th stand approved as read. Madam Secretary, please read the titles of the bills to be introduced this evening.
Bill number 9717, an ordinance concerning Public Works Pike Drive Water Petition, Excess Front Foot Benefit Assessment. Bill number 9817, an ordinance concerning Kensington's Special Community Benefit District. Bill number 9917, an ordinance concerning subdivision and development, adequate public school facilities, school utilization chart.
Thank you. May I have a motion to suspend the rules to hear and vote on Resolution 5417 out of order?
I have to read in
Oh,
the
excuse me.
resolution.
I'm sorry. Madam Secretary, please read the titles of the resolutions to be introduced this evening.
Resolution number 5417, resolution approving the continued service of Francis Phillips as acting health officer. Resolution number 5517, resolution confirming the reappointment of certain members to the Pension Oversight Commission for Anne Arundel County. Resolution number 5617, resolution urging the Anne Arundel County Office of Planning and Zoning and Department of Inspections and Permits to implement a 6-month moratorium on approvals of standalone solar generating facilities.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Walker.
I would like to withdraw Resolution 5617. I had this drafted earlier last week and sent it out to some of the folks that were in my district on Friday. And then I found out today that the county executive is implementing a moratorium, an 8-month moratorium on the same thing that I was asking the council to take a position on. So since he has gone ahead and initiated that, I'm going to withdraw my resolution and then thank him for his support.
Okay, then Resolution 5617 is withdrawn.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Madam Secretary, I'm sorry, may I have a motion to suspend the rules to hear and vote on Resolution 5417 out of order?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Second?
Second.
Second. Madam Secretary, can you call the roll?
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. The motion to hear and vote on resolution number 5417 out of order is passed.
Madam Secretary, please read the title of Resolution 5417.
Resolution number 5417, resolution approving the continued service of Francis Phillips as acting health officer.
Mr. Marzick.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, Bernie Marzick at the County Executive's Office. Resolution 5417 appoints Fran Phillips as acting health officer through December 3rd, 2018. As you all know, Dr. Chan continues to work with the State Department of Health. The Secretary of Health, Dennis Schrader, has approved this appointment, and you should have that letter before you. We would ask for your support of this resolution.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm certainly going to support the resolution. For some reason, I have stuck in my mind that acting could only serve for 6 months at a time, but this is, you're saying, for a year?
This is for the health officer. I believe the terms are different for the health officer.
I see.
Because it's actually appointed.
There's no term.
Because it's appointed by the state.
In the past, the Office of Law has given us advice that the health officer is construed as a department head. The last time, if you all recall, when Dr. Van Oberen was on military leave, they let us go back past the initial 60 and then 4-month period because we had federal law that trumped it.
Yeah.
When Dr. Chan was serving, there was a void in the state law as well as the county law as to what to do. So the inference was just, well, let her keep serving until she's officially appointed as a health officer. This is a different situation where we have a health officer, which she's on loan somewhere else. So now we have an acting health officer.
Yeah.
So the position isn't vacant, and it isn't a situation where the health officer is off serving based on some other law that trumps our charter. So it's kind of a void situation, and the Office of Law has decided that in the void, we're just going to let the state appoint Ms. Phillips as the acting health officer for the next year.
And do you concur with that?
It's rather unusual because we have a provision in the charter, so we're ignoring the charter because somehow the state law says we can do it. We're ignoring our charter when there's nothing in the state law that says that we have to accept this. So I mean, it's kind of, it's the council's call on what they want to do, but I mean, the charter says you have to, it's specifically designed so the county executive can't do something like what's happening right now.
But we were voting on it, so.
I mean, earlier today, it was you didn't even need to vote on it. That's what we were told earlier today.
Well, I don't know about that.
I'm just. I don't know why we're voting on it now. So.
So I think we're going to, in a second, I think we're going to hear from Office of Law. But before, Mr. Chair, if I might just.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, sir.
So in your, Ms. Tate, in your legal opinion, if this was a 6-month term, would that alleviate your concerns? Instead of 1 year?
I mean, it would be great if it comported with the charter. I mean, I have
but would a 6-month term
from 2010 and from 2013 from the Office of Law that say, you know, we should be acting within some framework, and it isn't just until the end of the next term.
So, again, if it wasn't till December 2018 and it was till July 2018, would that alleviate the concern that you're raising, or no?
Yeah, I mean, it would alleviate my concern because the correspondence I saw the other day made it sound like that they were not sure. What the council's, the Board of Health was told at the last council meeting was they're not sure. But the way it looks is now we're supposed to accept an appointment for an entire year for someone who's acting.
Well, so if it was 6 months, there would be nothing to preclude us from then doing another 6 months in July and getting the same result.
It's a 4-month increment.
Oh, 4 and not 6.
That's what's required, yes. The only time we've gone outside of the 4-month increment was when Dr. Van Overen was on military leave, and we were preempted by federal law and state pension law from telling him that he couldn't stay on his deployment. And that is how we ended up having Doug Hart serve an extended amount of time. We have a lot of instances where we have an acting health officer, and here we are again with one for almost 2 years.
Well, Mr. Chair, if we might, I think
I was just waiting for you to come to a comma there. You know, may we have your position, please?
Lori Blair, Klassmeyer, Deputy County Attorney. So I want to back up 1 second. The source of the timing that we're all talking about here is Section 509 of the Charter. And basically what that says is that for a department head appointed by the county executive, there's a limit of 60 days plus 4 months. So nobody could, appointed by the county executive, serve more than 6 months. The situation here is that the health officer is actually a state appointee. So that section of the charter does not apply. So it's not that there's a void, it's not that we're ignoring the charter, it's that the charter, that provision of the charter, they're limiting that time period does not apply to a department head not appointed by the county executive. The way the health officer works is there is a nomination process that involves both the county executive and the, and then a concurrence by the county council and a name to the Secretary of the Department of Health, the State Department of Health, to appoint a health officer. I faded out. Somebody didn't like what I said. No. So we don't have, so in order, so an acting health officer isn't treated any differently than a health officer. That is still a state appointment. So there's no limitation on the timing of that estate appointment. It's totally within the power of the, it's exactly what the, I'm sorry, now I lost my train of thought. It's exactly what whatever the Secretary of Health determines. And the Secretary of Health has concurred in and recommended and appointed through December 3rd. Now, that doesn't mean that if Dr. Chan, for some reason, does not return as health officer to the county, that a new health officer couldn't come in at be appointed sometime between now and December 3rd.
No, I understand.
This is an interim appointment. Well, and we do, let me just back up 1 second. The 2010 was a little bit different because Dr. Van Overen was deployed through the National Guard, and we had a kind of another county employee acting during that period of time, so now we've got somebody from the outside. So it's a little bit different, but when, in 2013, the advice that I think Ms. Tate is talking about was from Dave Plymire, the prior, at the time he was the county, I believe he was the county attorney at the time, at least the deputy county attorney at the time, and what he said was that that it could be done even without coming to this council because the secretary has that appointment power, the state secretary has that appointment power. We feel it had to come, I felt that it should come to the council because you're involved in the nomination process for a health officer and because you sit as the Board of Health. So this is basically a concurrence in what the secretary is doing.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Trumbauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So when lawyers disagree, it makes me uncomfortable because look, I love Dr. Chair as acting health officer. I've heard only good things. I'm going to support her.
Dr. Phil.
Dr. Phillips.
Fran Phillips.
Her too, right. But if there's some sort of disagreement, can we just do 4 now and then we can vet this issue a little bit more? And if we have to, if by the time that 4 months runs out, if we've gotten to the bottom of it and everybody agrees, I don't mind going to December. I just feel uncomfortable voting for something when our legislative attorney has concerns. But that doesn't reflect my opinion of Dr. Phillips at all. I want to support her. I just am a little nervous we're breaking the rules.
Well, the 4 months is not, the 4 months doesn't apply. That's what I'm saying here. In other words, if the 4 months apply.
But if we think it does with the administration, it's no longer a legal question. I guess I'm asking the administration. Mr. Marzik, could we just do 4 now, get to the bottom of this, and then we can do more later if we have to? This is making me uncomfortable.
Well,
Mr. Chair.
Obviously, the council can do what it wants, but I think...
Just a minute. Let him respond to that.
Okay. Your question is,
can we just
is it okay to extend by 4 years, but not extend, or excuse me, by 4 months, but not, you're still doing something you're saying you can't do?
Well, I'm not entirely clear. I know that what I've heard from our legislative attorney and the charter says for appointments by the county executive, that's 4 months. I thought it was 6. You guys said it's 4. I believe
it's
you.
2 months
it's 2
plus
plus
4 months. And she's already done the 2 plus the 4.
Right, so it would be 4.
So if
But there's
Ms. Tate is right, it's too late anyway, because you can't, it's not a continuous period of 4 months.
May I interject? Excuse me. Mr. Smith, before I get to you, may I just try to solve something here? Thank you for your patience. Ms. Tate, it seems to be the crux of the issue here is whether or not it's an appointment by the county executive, and is that to you the crux of the issue?
Well, part of it's not for me because I was relying on prior advice from the county Office of Law that says Section 509 of the Charter provides for temporary appointments of county officials. The language in Section 553 of the Charter states that all references to the head of a county office or department shall be construed to apply to the health officer. Thus, we have construed the power of temporary appointments in Section 509 of the Charter as applicable to the health office in providing a means for the appointment of the acting health officer. Section 509 has been used in the past for the appointment of an acting health officer, subject to concurrence by the Secretary. However, this office has consistently advised that under 509C of the Charter, there is 1 60 appointment of an acting department head and 1 4-month extension by resolution. We've advised this limitation cannot be legitimately avoided by asserting some sort of break in status. The notes to the Charter make it clear that the point of time limits was to enforce the executive to make a permanent appointment to the position, rather than allow the office to languish under acting leadership. Now, the problem we have here is we've been told we have a permanent appointee who's on loan for how many months it's been now, and you need to give an acting person while this person's on loan. Then we were told today by the law office that, well, we really don't need to come to the council at all, really, because it's up to the secretary to do an acting thing, because there's a void in the state law on how to deal with the position when it's vacant, other than for the appointment of a permanent position. So
thank you. So rather than characterize what the Office of Law is saying now, can we just? I would prefer to just ask the Office of Law, because you're relying, if I'm not mistaken, you're relying on a previous Office of Law's interpretation. Is
two of them, as well as the county charter.
Okay. Let me, at this point, Mr. Smith, go ahead. Do you want to weigh in?
I did. The health officer wears two hats. So the executive agent or assistant for the Board of Health, because we also sit as the Board of Health. What does that mean when, because in that capacity, she works for us, for this Board of Health.
But she is a state appointee.
Correct.
No matter what hat she's
But in
wearing.
that EA capacity, she still works for the Board of Health with the second hat. Is that not correct? According to the state and the county, or the state code and the county charter.
She fulfills that function as a state, she's a state appointee who fulfills that function.
Correct. But what I'm saying is, in that capacity, does she not work for the Board of Health?
Does she not work for the Board of Health? I'm not
She
sure.
does. She does. The charter says the Board of Health is the county council.
Right.
And the health officer is the executive agent for the Board of Health.
But by virtue of the fact that she is the state appointee in that position.
I get it. I'm saying it's still two different hats, just like you have combatant commanders and you have, military.
I'm not
Mr.
disagreeing.
Smith, I think this is kind of semantics, but I think she is is it executive agent? Is that the title?
I think that's what it is.
She works for the Department of Health. She is the executive agent for the Board of Health, yes.
Correct. And who is the Board of Health?
You.
But she's in that position by virtue of the fact that she is the person appointed by the state to that position.
Because we also vote to allow her to sit in that position. Correct?
Yes, it's an advice and consent procedure.
Yeah. We also vote to allow her to sit in that position. Is that not correct? Just like Dr. Chan, we voted. It has to be. She has three bosses. She has the state, the county executive as the health officer, and then us for the Board of Health.
But that doesn't change the status. That's the only thing that you look at for her as the health officer.
I love her. I love her to death. This has nothing to do with Fran Phillips. I'm telling you, I love her to death.
I don't understand how what you're saying makes a difference.
Well, it makes a difference in the sense that shouldn't we be entitled to determine, at least with that second hat, or weigh in on the terms of that temporary status to some
And
extent.
that's why we're here. I mean, a prior county attorney, Ms. Tate read advice. I haven't seen that advice. I don't know what the full extent of that, what she's talking about is. But in 2013, the advice from Mr. Pliermeyer was that the principal counsel of the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene and he concurred that the interim appointment lies within the powers of the secretary. The county health officer is a state rather than county official with final appointment authority resting with the Secretary of Health and Mental Hygiene. So Section 509 of the charter is really the only, and what Section 509 says is you get 60 days. If you are a county executive appointee, 60 days plus 4 months. You get a total of 6 months as an acting department head. Health officer is not a county executive appointee. Health officer is a state department, Secretary, Department of Health appointee. That we cannot use the charter to trump what the Secretary of the State Department of Health does under his or her statutory authority. So that whole 6 months limitation is not applicable to the health officer. And that is consistent with advice that was given in 2013 by the Office of Law.
Well, I would just say I think this body, the good thing is we make the laws here in the county. I think it's our interpretation of what we believe is the right path. Again, I think what Chris mentioned before, Fran Phillips is an awesome person. I really do respect her dearly. This has zero to do with her, more about where we think we fit into this equation and how we leverage our ability to make a decision versus the fourth floor. That's all it is.
And you're being asked to make a decision. I mean, Mr. Pliermeyer determined in 2013 that nothing even needed to come before this body to get past 6 months. What we've determined now is we feel that you should have a chance because you do sit as the Board of Health. Because if we were having a whole new health officer, you would be involved in that nomination process.
So if Dr. Chan is going to, if this appointment is to December 3rd of 2018, why not just have her resign in that capacity and then she just continue to work for the state and then we just permanently install Fran Phillips?
Because we don't know if she'll permanently stay with the state. That's the issue.
I think that situation is different from 2000.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. yield my time. Go ahead.
Thank you, and I appreciate your patience. Mr. Fink?
Thank you. If we, I'm going to use the word buy in, but I'm going to, buy into Ms. Tate's explanation, then Fran Phillips is gone, right? I mean, 'cause
No.
she's already hit her 6-month tenure here.
No, what would happen is your non-concurrence would be communicated to the secretary, and the secretary can do what they
But, okay.
want.
Sure, the secretary can do what he wants.
This is not an approval. This is not a approval.
If we take Ms. Tate's suggestion, that means we would not vote on this resolution, or we vote no. There wouldn't be another resolution that comes before us for 4 months that would fit under, I guess this question is really for you, Ms. Tate, but, you know, if we go with what you're suggesting, you're essentially saying that Fran Phillips has finished her time with this county as an acting secretary, and we'd have to hope the executive and the secretary would appoint someone new?
We could appoint another acting, I guess.
Or to appoint another acting. I mean,
Appoint another
the issue
acting,
is,
so-
I mean, it's sort of, you're relying on the 2013 advice. And
Right,
I
but
think
you're...
we have
you're
a different situation.
I understand, but you're essentially saying that your interpretation is that Fran Phillips has served her 6 months and there needs to be a new acting secretary.
That's, if you're going to be consistent with the prior advice that I have, yeah.
Right.
I mean, the
So-
problem is, it's different than the 2013 situation where we didn't have anyone. We
understand.
have someone.
So
and
then-
she hasn't
No, wait.
resigned.
The 2013
It's my
was
time, I
not
think.
Dr.
Mr. Chairman.
Everybody's talking about
Mr.
Mr. Fink.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Please.
Okay.
So the suggestion that we put up a new resolution for 4 months wouldn't necessarily quiet your concerns?
No.
Right.
I mean, you know, that's...
That's good. That's all I wanted. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fink.
Can I just clarify that the 2013 was not the Dr. Van Uveren situation?
I'm aware of that.
That was the 2010 situation.
Who was the
Mr.
health
Chair,
officer?
point of order.
I'm
Mr.
sorry,
Chair,
who
point
was
of
the...
order.
Thank you.
Who was the health officer in 2013?
Mr. Walker?
The people at the table should request to speak from the chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. I wholeheartedly agree. May I take this pause here to ask you, Mr. Marzik, how do you want to proceed?
The point raised by Mrs. Klossmeyer is that the Office of Law has advised us we did not need to bring a resolution to the council. We brought the resolution to the council in light of the issues that have been raised by Mr. Smith, by Mr. Peruka in the past. We thought it was kind of a gesture of essentially goodwill to the council to say the Secretary of Health has appointed her as acting for the next roughly year. And we wanted you all to be aware of that and concur with that recommendation, which it seems like everyone concurs is a good idea. So we think the council should proceed and vote on Ms. Phillips as acting health officer.
Mr. Trumbauer, you have a suggestion?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so after listening to this discussion, I'm going to propose a course of action. Even though I'm slightly uncomfortable with it, I intend to vote for this resolution, but I also intend tomorrow to write a letter to the Attorney General and ask for their opinion. And so if they come back and they say that that's invalid, we'll deal with the circumstances. If they come back and say what you did is perfect, then we're all happy because we want to keep Dr. Phillips in the position. But I do think that we've talked for I don't know how long. There's clearly some different interpretations. I'd like to get to the bottom of it. And since we're inferring that it is a state appointment, I think the Attorney General would be the appropriate person to ask. Does anybody think that's a bad solution?
I do have a comment, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Smith.
Just to piggyback on what you said earlier, when you said that if we voted no, our dissension would just be noted, and then the secretary could still appoint. So my question is, in the beginning, for Dr. Chan, for example, if a resume came before us and we wanted to appoint a health officer, if we voted no, could the state still appoint that person as the health officer? If in this case?
Well, that would be the nomination process for the health officer, and it's that has a local governing authority provision, so it would be the county executive's recommendation with the approval of the county council.
But in that case, if we voted no,
Then we have to come up with another nominee.
but the continued service of an acting is governed by a completely different process, and you're saying that our opinion doesn't matter at that point?
All you're doing is concurring or not, and then that's communicated to the secretary, and the secretary can do it.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, Mr. Walker.
Mr. Marzik, when does the 4-month run out? What's the date for the expiration of her 4 months?
November 30th, I believe is
my
the date.
understanding.
So it's already passed?
Right.
Okay. And one other question for you as well. Are we paying both Dr. Chan's salary and Dr. Phillips?
I don't think we pay either because it's the State Department of Health, right?
Well, that's a whole nother. My understanding is the way it works is the salary is part of the large, the acting health officer's salary is part of the large block grant that comes to the county, is the best that we can determine. Because the salary of the health officer is budgeted through the state.
But we're paying.
They're a state appointee paid with a state paycheck. Because we have an acting right now, they actually paid with a county paycheck, but out of the block grant.
So we are paying both of them in a sense?
No, I believe that, well, I don't know about, I believe that we're not paying Dr. Chan's salary as health officer any longer. I assume she's being paid by through whatever function
Can we
she's being paid with
follow
the
up on
state.
that
I can
assumption?
double check.
Can we follow up on that assumption
Yeah.
for Ms. Dickerson's sake, to be sure that we are not assuming that something's happening that's not happening?
We're going to call the question here in a second. Ms. Jody, did you want, Ms. Dixon, do you want to?
I was just going to say, I know we are paying the acting health officer as a temporary employee right now. I don't know what the situation is with Dr. Chan. I have not checked that. The question is, what she was saying about the block grant is whether the state reimburses us for paying that amount of money. So those are open questions right now. We don't know.
Thank you. I'm going to suggest. I'm going to make just a statement that I believe that I share Mr. Smith's concerns that I believe that a lot of this arises out of the fish and fowl aspect of what we are as a Board of Health and what we control. This is somebody else appoints her, then somebody else recommends her, then we concur and we concur in the appointment, but yet the pay is this is a complex situation. My suggestion here is that we should take Mr. Trumbauer's suggestion and go ahead and vote on this, and if he's willing, or I would be willing to write a letter or co-sign the letter to Attorney General to try to get an opinion to clarify it. Would that be what you would propose?
Yeah, either way. I mean, I intend to vote aye, but I intend to note that we're requesting an AG opinion.
Okay, well, with that, may I open the public hearing? Does anybody want to further this?
I think we've pretty much
this
beat
discussion,
it to
or
death,
we?
yeah.
All right. Seeing no movement, we'll close the public hearing. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Resolution 5417.
Resolution number 5417, resolution approving the continued service of Francis Phillips as acting health officer.
Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. Madam Secretary, please call the roll on Resolution 5417.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Noting my previous concern, I will vote aye.
Mr. Walker.
Same concern, but aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Zero concerns. Aye.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Resolution 5417 is adopted.
Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill number 7617 as amended.
Bill number 7617 is amended, an ordinance concerning planning and development, master plan for water supply and sewerage systems.
Mr. Marzick?
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, Bernie Marzick, County Executive's Office. With me at the table, Phil Hager from Planning and Zoning, Lord Blair Klossmeyer from the Office of Law. As we've discussed at several meetings, Bill 7617 is the update to the county's water and sewer master plan. We would ask for your support tonight.
Any questions? Public hearing. We'll now open the public hearing. I think we have some folks signed up for this. Am I right? Mr. Gordon Reel, Mr. Paul Burdette, and David Katz. And come on down. And please state your name and address. Let's start with Mr. Reel. Please state your name and address in 2 minutes, please.
Gordon Reel of 1210 Bayview Court, Edgewater zip code, but I live in Mayo.
Okay. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I probably should have been in that first group, but I didn't know there was such a thing. I have 2 points to make, and because at the end of the sewer moratorium, the for sale lot across the street from me immediately began construction, it came to mind 2 things. I've been to a couple neighborhood meetings, and I've seen your excellent plans and the fact that you're working another. But what I learned was that Arundel County holds a state record for granting waivers. You may make a terrific plan, but if you don't enforce it, what's the use? That I learned recently. What I learned some time ago by various hearings like this was that the citizens could object and their representatives can rule in their favor 100 times. But if they rule against a citizen once, that's the end of it. So when you're looking at a zoning variance, a waiver, whatever, you figure, well, this guy will come back if we tell him no. But if we deny what our citizens want, they don't get another chance. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Reel. Appreciate it. I don't see Mr. Burdette. Mr. Katz?
Yes, David Katz, 1931 Pendennis Drive. I'm an attorney on behalf of Better World Builders. Last council session, an amendment was proposed which removed roughly a 2-acre property from planned service. This is a parcel that is split zoned with more than an acre of commercially zoned property, and it fronts Whitehall Road. Now, the original application only dealt with the bulk parcel that fronts Whitehall Road that's zoned commercial. Better World Builders also owns 16+ acres that is zoned residential low density, is in the critical area, and is on Whitehall Creek. I think there was some confusion. I mean, listening to the opposition that spoke during that amendment and some comments that something is fishy here, I'd say that there's a misunderstanding of the facts and the intent of my client with regard to this property. The application specifically dealt with the bulk parcel that's zoned commercial. It's property that the county has designated that it wants for commercial development, hence the underlying zoning. It's outside of the critical area, and public utilities are on site. It's just not in it's just not in planned service. If you look at where public water and public sewer run, it runs up Whitehall Road. It hits each of the commercial businesses there. Then it hits our property. Then it runs across the street and goes and continues up Whitehall Road and serves the RXNT office building. So in my mind, essentially the community is saying it wants this property to be on a septic system versus public utilities, which is worse for the environment. So I just wanted to express that concern on behalf of my client.
Thank you, Mr. Katz.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Katz. Mr. Walker?
Mr. Katz, part of the question I think that came up was the concern from the community that at some point in the future that you would then take the RLD 16 acres,
right,
develop that at some density level, either at the RLD density that's there, or which would be 1 house per 5 acres, like 3 houses back there, or even possibly now that we have water and sewer within striking distance of that 15 or 16 acre parcel, that you would then go back to planning or to administrative hearing officer and request a zoning increase to increase the density in that 15 or 16 acre parcel. So that was sort of the fear that was expressed by the community, and I was just wondering if you could address that from your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I've reached out to members of the Growth Action Network. I had a good conversation with, an initial conversation with the chairman of the Greater Broad Deck Council, also somebody who's very active in the Amberley community. I want to continue dialogue with these residents, because, I think my client's, more than willing to make certain commitments regarding that, the bulk of the acreage, that property that's, the 16-plus acres that's now zoned RLD, that's in the critical area. I think my client's willing to make certain commitments that it's only going to be developed as one lot. So if the dialogue continues, I think that we can resolve some of the community's concern that this 16 acres on Whitehall Creek is going to be a massive, massive development. And there's certainly legal ways to restrict and limit via easements, restrictive covenants, which should put the community at ease that this property is never going to be more than just the 16 acres I'm talking about. The parcel that's in the critical area is never going to be more than one lot, one residential lot.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
I hope that answers it.
It did, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Does anybody else want to speak during the public hearing? Didn't sign up. Good evening.
I'm Ann Flexton from the Growth Action Network, and I haven't been as involved with this project that Mr. Katz spoke about. Pat Lynch has really been working on it, and I don't think they felt that there was going to be a possibility of reversal on that, so we don't have them here. Oh my gosh, there she is. Okay. I just think that each side has points, but I don't believe that the amendment is timely at this point until the situation is resolved. I think there are too many open questions that if we can have a dialogue in the future, but I would not like to see this changed until there's more, until things are certain.
Thank you. Ms. Lynch, good evening. I think you're on.
Am I on? Good, okay. I have met with my colleagues who were here 2 weeks ago and explained my conversation with Mr. Katz, and we are not in favor of what he is recommending. There have been major problems with that piece of property. The Better World Builders has been fined and cited for clearing without a permit on 2 separate days that we were all, Mr. Burdette and I were down there and watched them. This is critical area. It was in the critical area that the foliage was cleared, and they were well aware of what was going on, and they went back the next day and cleared some more. There are 3 addresses. Now, something is not right. 3 addresses that have been named for this property. There is a 1-acre commercial property that they're talking about putting water and sewer in. However, my understanding is, and I've been researching this afternoon, it's really 2.54 acres. So there are a lot of open questions that have not been answered, and the further we get into this, the more confusing it is. And I agree with Mrs. Flakeston, we need to leave it where it is.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Lynch. Before we close the public hearing, just because of the special nature of this, at the last meeting there was testimony with one side and the other side wasn't here, and now you've in all fairness, you've made a couple of assertions about wrongdoing on the part of the developer.
Well, on the clear cutting, that's already an INP, and that decision was made, and the penalty has been handed down.
And I appreciate that, but just where I was going with that is I just want to offer Mr. Katz an opportunity to have the microphone again if he wants it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Briefly.
Very briefly. We don't need to have a trial right now, so I think that how Ms. Lynch has categorized those facts are completely false, and they just are. And I would recommend that that you reach out to Inspections and Permits about this issue. The property was inspected, it was walked, so this massive clear cutting that's being claimed to have occurred never happened. There was old cars and refrigerators and trash all throughout the property that was being just removed. And if you disturb a blade of grass in the critical area, if you break one blade of grass, it constitutes clearing. Excuse me. So, sure, an issue was raised at that level, and it was resolved quickly with the county. But to say that there's mass clear cutting is absolutely false.
Thank you, Mr. Katz.
Thank
Ms.
you.
Lynch, I'm going to give you the last 10 seconds.
We will bring the report from INP to every one of you, and you can see they were fined $10,000. That was the maximum fine that was
All right.
allowed.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. Appreciate it. Is anybody else want to weigh in on this? If it's seeing nothing, public hearing is now closed. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill 7617 as amended.
Bill number 7617 is amended, an ordinance concerning planning and development master plan for water supply and sewerage systems.
And is there any discussion? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on Bill 7617 as amended.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
And Mr. Pruka.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Bill number 7617 is amended is passed.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill 8017 as amended.
Bill number 8017 is amended, an ordinance concerning rules of practice and procedure, Board of Appeals.
Mr. Marzick.
It's Mr. Grasso's bill. We
Excuse me,
support the bill.
I'm sorry, Mr. Grasso, Mr. Pruski.
Well, everybody already knows what myself and Mr. Pruski were doing for the Board of Appeals, so there's really, excuse me, nothing else to add.
Mr. Pruski.
The auditor concurred with the recommendations, and I think we've addressed everything.
Thank you. Mr. Marzick?
We're supportive of the bill.
Okay, well, then, good evening, Mr. Swain. Well, now open up the public hearing. Anyone want to comment? Seeing no movement, will the following, Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill.
Close the public hearing.
I'm sorry, we'll now close the public hearing. Thank you. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill 8017 as amended.
Bill number 8017 is amended, an ordinance concerning rules of practice and procedure, Board of Appeals.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, Madam Secretary, please call the roll on Bill 8017 as amended.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Bill number 8017 is amended is passed.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill 8317 as amended.
Bill number 8317 as amended, an ordinance concerning Article 2, branches of county government, executive and judicial branches.
Administration, Mr. Marzick.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, Bernie Marzick in the County Executive's Office. With me coming at the table is Lori Blair Klossmeyer from the Office of Law. This is our Article 2 rewrite that updates Article 2 to delete irrelevant sections and update other sections of the code for form, relevancy, and accuracy. We hope you'll support it tonight.
Thank you. Any questions? We'll now open the public hearing. Anyone want to contribute? Seeing no movement, we'll close the public hearing. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill 8317 as amended.
Bill number 8317 is amended, an ordinance concerning Article 2, branches of county government, executive and judicial branches.
Mr. Trumbauer?
I'm just turning my mic on so I can vote.
Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry.
I learned a couple meetings ago that if you don't have your mic on, sometimes you
First one to have the mic.
Yeah. So I learned my lesson.
I'm sorry. I'm just trying to be very attentive to you
No,
there.
that's very good.
Madam
I
Secretary,
appreciate that attention.
please call the roll on Bill 8317 as amended.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Bill number 8317 as amended is passed.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please read the title of Bill 8717 as amended.
Bill number 8717 is amended, an ordinance concerning current expense budget, transfer of funds, and supplementary appropriations.
Mr. Marzick?
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, Bernie Marzick in the County Executive's Office. With me at the table, Stephen Theroux from Budget Office and Lori Blair Klossmeyer from the Office of Law, Alex Sheknovich from Anne Arundel County Public Schools, and Emily Brandenburg from the County Executive's Office. This is the transfer bill from from the general fund into various departments. We adopted a series of amendments at the last council hearing, and we'd be happy to answer any questions on this bill the council has.
Are there any questions?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the things that we talked about at the last meeting was I believe it was $80,000 for the study on I don't know how we're going to phrase this, the design.
Engineering.
Yes. Yeah, the engineering, right, okay. Has anything happened between that meeting and now that alleviates the school system's concern, Mr. Shaknovich?
For the record, Alex Shaknovich, Chief Operating Officer. No, it is not.
Thank you. Mr. Gressa? No.
Good. Mr. Chair?
Mr. Walker.
Mr. Marzick, because we had that conversation that Chris was referencing, anything changed from your perspective?
No, I see you have the amendment. I don't know if we want to discuss it now or when you have the amendment, but our perspective on this is that we think it's a good investment of $80,000 to do the value engineering on these 4 schools. In no way, shape, or form will we let this impact the progress of those schools. We think there can be some really good lessons learned and some opportunity to save taxpayers a lot of money on some of these projects that are hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer dollars being spent. As I think I said, and maybe I wasn't very eloquent about it last time, but we will not let this impact the progress of these schools being built. If there are items that we find can be changed without impacting the development, we think they should be changed, and we can work with the board on those changes. But we do not want them to slow down the construction in any way of the 4 schools, the high school and the elementary schools that are being studied. But we think there's a real value to having an extra set of eyes on, again, hundreds of millions of dollars of construction projects.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We'll now open up the public hearing. Anybody want to comment on this piece of legislation? Seeing no movement, we'll close the public hearing. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill 8717 as amended.
Bill number 8717 is amended, an ordinance concerning current expense budget, transfer of funds, and supplementary appropriations.
Is there any further discussion?
Mr. Pruitt?
Yes.
Mr. Marzick, let's just say, for example, that the plan comes back and suggests certain changes. And when you say work with the Board of Education, do you mean go to them and say, here's what we think you should change based on these recommendations, and then, oh, by the way, if you don't agree to them, we're only going to fund the amount of dollars we think are necessary to build the school? I mean, is your intent to come back and use these to then justify cuts to the Board of Education's request for these schools?
No, I think our plan is we've worked very collaboratively with the board, and I'm sure Mr. Sheknovich would agree. I hope you would agree. Over the last 3 years, we've done it specifically on these 4 schools that are in place. I think the idea is to give the county executive's office and the county council and the public another set of eyes on these projects. When you're spending $120 million on a project, I think it's worthwhile to look very closely at that and see if there is some different perspective that can save taxpayers some dollars. That's simply the goal.
Is there some reason why it wouldn't be prudent to do it after the fact, to say, here, we've gone through these designs, we've gone through these plans, we've built these buildings, now let's go back and take a look for all the future schools that are coming down the pipe?
You could do that. I think we have a great opportunity right in front of us of 3 elementary schools and a brand new high school being built, where I think otherwise if you're doing it on a high school in the future, you're going to have to wait for a while to do it. I think we've got a great opportunity in front of us with these 4 schools that the council has been strongly supporting, and I think it's a great opportunity that we don't think we should miss.
Mr. Shaknovich, I know you've already expressed your sort of opposition to this. The administration makes a good point, right? What we want to spend, all of us want to spend the dollars that we have as prudently as possible. How do you see this playing out from your perspective if this proposal comes back and says, we feel like these changes are necessary and that would equate to, fewer dollars coming your way for the buildings? Or
2 points. 2 points. One is, there's a large statewide task force, the NOC Commission, that just met today and will be meeting again next Thursday, that's been working for about a year to bring forward a whole host of suggestions that they're going to suggest to the General Assembly, to the IEC, and to the public school construction program to address costs, increase efficiencies, effectiveness of public school construction. And so it may be well worth our time to see what the work product is of this 1.5 year long commission. That aside, each recommendation that comes our way, we evaluate. And we currently do value engineering at present. We do it purposefully and with deliberance. And we take a look at each suggestion that comes about from the value engineering exercise and determine, are we saving dollars for a specific item? So for example, if you can use manufacturer's B's pump and it works just as effectively, just as efficiently, and you're going to get the same longevity and useful life out of that asset as manufacturer A, but yet you can save $7,000, absolutely. There's absolutely no opposition to that. But unfortunately, the concept of value engineering has been misconstrued over time to also just be abject cost cutting. Anybody can cut costs. You can take 5/8 inch drywall that we do use and say, well, gosh, just use 1/2 inch drywall instead. You'll save money. No doubt about it. You'll save money the very first day you put it in. You will pay for that decision for the rest of your life through the School of Hard Knocks and Regrets as you're patching and replacing that through operating monies every time a kid puts an elbow through it, et cetera. So you have to be very judicious and prudent in your evaluation of these recommendations to see which ones in fact save money but preserve that asset for its intended useful life versus those that are just blindly looking to cut costs. When this current year's budget was established, an individual within the budget office recommended for Tyler Heights, Richard Henry Lee, and Edgewater Elementary School a lower dollar figure than was requested by the board. The board's methodology was calculated per the state algorithm using the state sanctioned dollars per square foot, et cetera, and an individual in the budget office decided that some other value was going to be
In our budget office?
In the county's budget office. So we had some conversations. Ms. Dickerson certainly remembers that, and we said, okay, well, let's see what happens, right? I mean, these projects are going to be designed, they'll get bid, and we have yet another opportunity this May to rectify that depending on what the outcome is. Over the course of time, we have almost always returned money to the county. We have not had a project come in over budget in my history here. And remember that the Board of Education can't use or reallocate those monies to any other projects. So to the extent that projects are designed and bid and there's money saved in those projects through the reappropriation process, those monies are reverted back to the county. And we work collaboratively with the administration and with this council then to have those savings reallocated, reapportioned as a funding source to the next project. So there's no incentive for the Board of Education to essentially wastefully spend or over-design or should I say blow money, because we're really shooting ourselves in our own foot. The monies that we save on Project A gets recycled through the appropriation process, because remember, capital budgets are line item appropriated. I can't move a single penny from Edgewater to Richard Henry Lee or from Richard Henry Lee to Crofton, et cetera. I can't move a single penny without this body's concurrence by vote. So we very aggressively try to manage our projects as well as possible. We try to maximize state dollars. We want to wring out every state dollar possible, because maximizing the state dollars saves us on the county end, and then we try to be conservative and judicious in our use of the county dollars so that we do bring projects in under budget, we do deliver them on time, and we're able to revert those dollars back to this county as a funding source, so we all have the opportunity to redirect those dollars to the next project. And we intend to, and we're committed to continuing to do that.
Thank you.
Finally, we have no projects requested for planning or design as part of our FY19. I mean, I know we haven't submitted our formal requests yet, we are nearing completion. Crofton's already broke ground. We're nearing completion of the designs on the next 3. We have no large-scale projects that are going to be coming before this body for planning and design and considerations for FY19. It's going to be FY20. It's going to be the next time that we're going to be asking for dollars to do comprehensive designs and renovations. It may be beneficial to hold this exercise, even if you want to call it academic exercise, as we get closer to that time, so that we're informed by whatever the NOTS Commission's work. We'll know what the current codes and standards and applicable guidelines are in 2020 as opposed to what's available in calendar year 2017, et cetera. I think that it will be more relevant if you do that exercise closer to the next set of design projects that we have, which again will not be until FY 2020.
And at that point, you wouldn't object to the study?
No, absolutely not. I just think that currently it's duplicative, and I think that it's going to be hard pressed for us to wring the benefits out of it, applying those to the 2020 projects as that time comes, so we can do that through the budgetary process at that time when the appropriations are considered. I think that's a very different discussion. I just think that the timing of this proposal is problematic.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Anybody else? Okay, I understand there's an amendment. Mr. Walker?
Does she need to read the amendment?
Oh, excuse me. Madam Secretary, please read amendment number 2.
Amendment number 2. This amendment decreases the transfer of general fund appropriations from the Chief Administrative Officer's contingency account by $80,000 and removes the $80,000 transfer to the Chief Administrative Officer's contractual services plan for outside review of the Board of Education's design plans for county schools.
Motion to adopt, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
So moved.
Mr. Walker?
It basically does what it says, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Madam, is there any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Grasso?
Mr. Marsick, where's the administration on this amendment?
We're opposed to this. I think we believe we have an opportunity here to look at these 4 schools. I'm not going to repeat everything I just said. But
I just wanted to hear that. You're good right there. Yeah. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Sheknovich, where are you at this amendment?
We're in favor of the amendment.
Okay, good enough for me. All right, thank you.
Mr. Walker? Nope. No? Mr. Pruski? I just see lights on, so I just...
Getting ready to vote?
Oh, okay. Just trying to be attentive. Madam Secretary, please call the roll on amendment number 2.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Nay.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Nay.
5 in the affirmative, 2 in the negative. Amendment number 2 is adopted.
Okay, bill number 8717 as amended will be heard on December 18th, 2017. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill 9017.
Bill number 9017, an ordinance concerning Cedarhurst on the Bay Shore Erosion Control District, approval of loan and assignment agreement.
Mr. Marzick?
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, Bernie Marzick in the County Executive's Office, with me at the table, Tomia Debu from the Budget Office, Kinley Bray from the Office of Law. Bill 9017 provides the authority for the county to levy a special tax for the Shore Erosion Control District assessment on the Cedarhurst on the Bay Shore Erosion Control District starting in fiscal year 2018. This tax will be used to repay the $500,000 loan that will be used for the maintenance of an existing shore erosion bulkhead and dredging project. The repayment of the term is 10 years. We'd be happy to answer any questions, Council.
Any questions?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Grasso?
Mr. Walker, your area? Okay, good enough. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walker, for co-sponsoring.
No problem.
Mr. Chair?
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Trumbauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Auditor, I'm just looking over your blue letter, and you say that the SCD should use its fiscal balance to pay the first installment. Is that something are you recommending a change, or you're concurring with what's happening in the?
The bill is okay as it is.
Okay.
I was pointing out the fact that when they developed the budget for this current year, the district put in enough tax assessment to pay the first payment on this loan because I think they thought it would go a little faster.
Okay.
But now, when they settle, they think the next payment's going to be next year.
I understand. Okay.
So they will have some excess fund balance.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir. We'll now open up the public hearing on Bill number 9017. Anyone?
Got one.
Oh, is there one signed up? Yes, sir.
Yes, my name is Michael Brown, President of Cedar Citizens Association. We take our finances very serious. We've come from Isabel taking much damage and having zero money and begging and borrowing and stealing to produce what we've produced in the last 10 years. And this is the last phase. We have lots of money in the bank, lots of money in the county's bank, and we're trying to finish off a safety issue that needs to be taken care of. And we manage our money, Mr. Grasso, very well, just as you say. So please.
But you didn't steal.
No.
You said beg, borrow, and
As
steal.
far as you know.
Just wanted to clarify.
Just a figure of speech. Thank you, sir. Madam Secretary, please, I'm sorry, we close the public hearing. There's no further movement. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill 9017.
Bill 9017, an ordinance concerning Cedarhurst-on-the-Bay Shore Erosion Control District, approval of loan and assignment agreement.
Any further discussion? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on Bill 9017.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Bill 9017 is passed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill 9117.
Bill number 9117, an ordinance concerning Indian Hills Special Community Benefit District, approval of loan and loan modification agreement.
Mr. Marzick.
Mr. Chairman, members of council, Bernie Marzick, County Executive's Office, with me at the table, Tommy Adebu from the Budget Office, and Kinley Bray from the Office of Law. 9117 provides the authority for the county to level a special community benefit assessment on Indian Hills Special Community District for 11 years, starting in fiscal year 2018. We will offer a technical amendment at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Any discussion, any questions? I will now open up the public hearing. Anyone sign up for this? No. Who's? Is it me? No, it's not me.
It's closed. Close the public hearing if you don't have the money.
Yeah, okay. Now close the public hearing. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill 9117.
Bill number 9117, an ordinance concerning Indian Hills Special Community Benefit District, approval of loan and loan modification agreement.
Any other discussion? I understand there's an administrative amendment.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Oh, got to be off first. Sorry.
Oh, Madam Secretary, would you please read the amendment?
Amendment number 1, on page 2, this technical amendment corrects a drafting error in the bill relating to the duration of the extension of the original loan.
Move to adopt, Mr. Chair.
Second. Mr. Chairman, this is just a technical amendment to correct a mistake that was put in to the drafting of the bill as far as the length of the loan. The length is staying the same, it's just the 2 years is not correct.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Grasso.
Can we call a vote tonight, being as a technical amendment?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, please call, any other discussion? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on amendment number 1.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Amendment number 1 is adopted.
And so can we vote on the bill?
Yeah, you call the roll on the bill tonight. She's wrong that line there. That's her mess up.
Well, I've got enough of my own.
I'll read the bill as
Madam Secretary, would you read the bill 9117 as amended?
Bill 9117, Indian Hills Special Community Benefit District, approval of loan and loan modification agreement.
Any further discussion? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on Bill 9117.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Fink?
Aye.
Mr. Pruski?
Aye.
Mr. Peruka?
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Bill number 9117 as amended is passed.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill number 9217.
Bill number 9217, an ordinance concerning subdivision and development, adequate public facilities, school utilization chart.
Thank you. Mr. Grasso.
Like I've mentioned this once before, that the issue that we have is I've always been one of these type of people that I don't believe in taking things right to the edge. And one of our problems with the developments going into the adequate public facilities is that if school capacity is at 100% or one person less, they'll turn around and they'll allow a massive development to go forward, even though knowing that it's going to overcrowd the schools. Now, there's been cases where the developers have met with the Board of Education to mitigate, through school development or possibly adding on additional classroom space, but that's fine too. But law sense, they don't have to do that. And so what I was trying to provide is a little bit of a cushion, and it's not the silver bullet to the problem of the APF as far as the school is concerned. My next piece of legislation ought to make the developers do backflips. So this one right now is just to give us a little bit of a cushion for walk-ins. If you got a 500 capacity school, you're talking about 25 seats. And so the new threshold, so it'll be 100% occupancy of the school. It's now going to be 95%. But once again, even if this bill passes, it's still not going to address the situation like we have in Councilman Smith's area, where he has 1,300 or 1,400 houses going in, and there's no mentioning of a school. So my next piece of legislation will address that, and that's pretty much where we're at. I also spoke to Councilman Pruski, and he asked about holding the bill, that there may be some possible amendments. I'm looking on the sheet here that there is some council amendments, but I don't see them anywhere, so if someone's aware of that, that's pretty much where we're at this point.
Mr. Marzick?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the council. Bernie Marzick in the County Executive's Office. With me at the table, Greg Swain from the Office of Law, and Phil Hager from Planning and Zoning Officer, and Alex Sheknovich in Arundel County Public Schools. The administration continues to have concerns with this bill, as we did 2 years ago and earlier this year when this bill was presented, because we believe the development should be regulated through the General Development Plan. Planning and Zoning has been receiving public feedback at numerous listening sessions throughout the county, and staff have expedited the GDP at the request of the county executive and also at the urging of the county council. I believe it was a unanimous resolution related to the GDP. Second, if we're not using our schools to capacity, we could put ourselves at a competitive disadvantage of other jurisdictions for very limited state school construction dollars. School capacity for the APF testing at 100% of state-rated capacity makes sense, since that is what the state provides to the local Board of Ed for its planning purposes, especially for facility planning. Third, we believe, as we've said before, that taxpayers should receive 100% of the benefit for the school for which they paid 100% for. 100% capacity is not a problem in our schools because schools at 100% are not overcrowded, but they have the number of students that these schools were designed for. 90% capacity is the level which MGT or 85% MGT is said is what the school is being used efficiently. And 100% is where taxpayers' dollars are being used appropriately. As I've said, with the previous attempt with this bill, Ms. Brandenburg put together a task force in which the council was invited to participate related to APF issues. And this group did not recommend making this change from 100% to 95%. We would urge that if the council does move forward with this, that you consider some mitigation options to increase school construction, as Mr. Smith has discussed at the previous council meeting related to school construction issues. We are all in favor of efforts to expedite school construction and trying to put us on a fast track and to have smaller schools, as the county executive has said numerous times. So we believe that the capacity should remain at 100% until these other large issues related to development are addressed through the GDP, which is an ongoing process right now.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Grasso.
Let me talk about a couple things here. I can rest assured to you that I could go to 10 out of 10 houses and say to a parent, would you rather the school be maximized at 100% or would you rather see it less than that? And I guarantee you, every single parent would rather their school be less than what the capacity is supposed to be. I mean, it just makes logical sense that a teacher's going to be able to give more attention to a smaller classroom than to a larger classroom. So using the argument of the taxpayers getting what they want, I will take you around to every single house, and every one of them will tell you that they'd rather the classrooms be under the 100%, not at the 100%. So I don't really tend to agree with that. The second thing, too, is that I feel is a real problem here, is that I think we're disingenuous with the taxpayers' money. And the reason why I'm saying that is that when you address an overcrowding of schools by your answer is, let's go ahead and build more schools, the brunt of that expense is going to be put on the taxpayers, and the fact of the matter is when the brunt really should be on the developers. See, the developers are the ones that are causing the problem, and we, the taxpayers, are picking up their slack for them not paying for the proper amount to make that school big enough or to build a new school. Councilman Smith can give you a good example, unless things have changed in his area. They're building 1,400 school or houses, and there's no mention of a school, none. And so they're going to wind up putting a minimum of probably 2,000 kids into an overcrowded school system that he's in. So really what's going on here is the developers are letting the taxpayers become the ones that are footing the bill so they can make their little happy money and run away. My answer to this problem is the next piece of legislation that's coming out to the table is to say very clearly, if you turn around and build a development and you exceed the 95%, you are not moving forward. We don't care about the 6-year rule that because you waited 6 years, you're going to go ahead and flood the school system so you can make money, so our kids are not serviced properly in the school system, and so that the taxpayers are going to have to turn around and foot the bill again because you're not paying enough in. The impact fees that these developers are paying are not nearly enough to compensate the money the taxpayers are going to lose so that they can make their money. That's what's going on. And so all the other the stuff that we're talking about, the 95%, is not even near the correct solution to fix this problem. But one thing I've learned on this council for the last 7 years is that we're going to keep kicking the can down the road over and over again because we don't want to ruffle some developers' money over there because they're contributing to certain specific people's campaign. And there's a point somewhere that we got to say what's right is right, and not because they turn around and give money to political candidates, they get what they want. And sadly say, I'm not part of wanting their money, nor do I want their money. And so you want to have to rest assured my campaign that will see money coming from those developers because I'm worried about the kids. That's who I'm worried about. And it doesn't matter what party you're with, the unfairness that's being done to these kids is atrocious. And I think the unfairness that is being put on the taxpayers by saying we're going to build more schools, that's great. Let's build more schools, but let the developers pay for it, not the taxpayers. And this is just the start of the conversation that I want to have. So, Mr. Chairman, unless there's anything else, and Councilman Pruski had something, we want to put a motion on the table to hold this bill so that if there is some legislation to...
We need a public hearing.
Well, I'm saying, I'm just throwing it out there.
You're
That's good.
preliminarily letting us.
Yeah, I'm just throwing it out there, okay?
Thank you.
Don't beat me up.
Mr. Chair.
Let me give Mr. Trumbauer, excuse me, Mr. Pruski first. And
Okay, thank you. Obviously, I'm not making a motion, it's not appropriate, but I don't know about the rest of the council members. I received a lot of emails in regards to this issue, particularly because I'm a former school board member. What I think, though, is that people have a misconception that if we pass this bill, that development's going to stop. What people don't realize is the development's already here. This bill does not address that. And I think part of the problem that we need to address, and this is what I talked to Mr. Grasso about the meeting, and one of the considerations I'm making for a possible amendment is where is the Board of Ed also held accountable in terms of redistricting, also approving additional school sites, and also mitigation. So I think those are some of the things that I would certainly look at with amendments. And you heard from the county executive, I don't know how they're going to vote, but this could be vetoed again. We've brought this up now 3 times, and there's no action. At some point, maybe we need to get 5 votes or 6 votes and maybe even get the admin on board. But I think for us to actually do something as a council, we need to make sure we certainly have enough support and have the action piece. I don't want to see it fall again. So I think that if we can try and come together, I'm going to try and send out some amendments this week to address some of those things I just mentioned, and hopefully we can bring that up, and I'll make a motion to hold, or Mr. Grasso will at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Chair.
Thank you. I wanted to get Mr. Trumbauer next, please. and then-
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, Mr. Walker. Just quicker on the button than you. Two quick questions to Mr. Shakhnovich. Number one, do you share the administration's concern about jeopardizing state funding if this legislation were to pass?
For the record, Alex Chagno, Chief Operating Officer, I absolutely do not share that same concern.
Okay.
Unequivocally do not.
Oh, okay. Unequivocally.
Yeah.
Thank you for that clarification. It's like strongly objecting, right? Or strenuously objecting from the movie. Anyway. Second question was, one thing that they did raise, which I am intrigued with, is the idea about additional mitigation steps. Because right now, as you know, our current system says, okay, 6 years, you wait, then you can build it, or I think you put some classroom space on there or something. Is a larger conversation about appropriate mitigation steps something that the school system is interested in?
Yes, sir, absolutely.
Okay, very good. I mean, not necessarily something that we will address in this legislation, although I guess it depends on what Mr. Pruski comes up with, but something that I do think is something that we should look into. So thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Shakhnovich.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
I want to get Mr. Walker and then Mr. Smith. A few good men, by the way.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Trumbauer stole one of my questions, but Mr. Marzick, in your comments, you mentioned that this was, I believe you said something along the lines of not one of the recommendations that came out of the APF work group that the county executive put together. When did they finish their meetings? Do you recall, just roughly?
Ms. Brandenburg is still here. She was the person who headed up that group, so I'm going to defer to her on.
Okay. Sorry to drag you up here, Ms. Brandenburg.
No problem.
I appreciate you staying.
No problem. We wrapped up the work group and the recommendations last summer.
Earlier this year? Oh, the summer before?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we provided 2 full reports down to your council office.
Okay. Mr. Marzick, was there a reason that the administration hasn't acted on any of the, I didn't take a chance to review all of the recommendations that are in there. Is there any reason why the administration didn't act on some of the recommendations maybe that came out of that group? Was there something, just timing or?
No, I think timing is one of the issues, and that we've been working on the mitigation issue for a while. It's a very complex issue, and we actually just had a meeting last week or 2 weeks ago with the board to discuss mitigation options, so it's an ongoing discussion. The request from the council was specifically to the 95% issue. As you remember, the bill was introduced and withdrawn, and then introduced and failed, and that was not one of the recommendations that came forward.
Are there ones that you could support?
From the task force?
We've introduced and adopted it.
Right.
Having the chart come down once a year in November was one of the recommendations from the task force. I'm trying to
But I mean, as far as handling, yeah, no, that's a good one. I appreciate that. Are there ones that you feel like would help address some of the concerns that Mr. Grasso has expressed?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Or I guess, is there some way that you could amend this bill into a position where you're okay with it, based on some of the recommendations that came out of that committee?
I think we have said, repeatedly that we have concerns with this bill. I think that some of the options that Mr. Pruski and Mr. Trumbauer discussed on the mitigation could, help move this bill in a better direction where we can, hopefully advance some of the causes of increasing school construction opportunities.
Well, is there a reason why you all haven't proposed any?
We're waiting to hear what the council said on the bill.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So over the last few months, I've certainly been digging into this issue quite handedly, and I've had a number of conversations with just about everybody that's involved, either as a parent or citizen or developers, you name it. I've had at least somewhat conversations. Obviously, I voted a particular way over the last couple of years when it comes to this, because at the end of the day, and I'll get to Mr. Grasso here in a second, I've always felt that this bill does, as Mr. Pruski mentioned, does zero to actually fix the problem. And the reason it doesn't do that because of the federal law and the 6 years a piece that allows development to still continue even if the capacity issue is not addressed. I've always said that. But to his credit, and he's mentioned that his intent is certainly to continue down this path, at some point, we as a body or leadership have to address it, what Mr. Pruski has mentioned. The problem isn't just the developers. The problem is over the last 40 years, we, the leadership of the county, have not built schools at a rapid enough pace to keep up with population growth. We've grown by 115,000 citizens in the last 14 years, 115,000. And so we have not built schools to keep up with that same growth rate. So that's been our issue historically. Obviously, we've tried to turn that around over the last few years. But when you have a population that continues to increase at this rate, but yet our schools increase at this rate, they're never going to connect. At some point, you either got to increase the school construction or classroom capacity at a much higher rate so it intersects with the growth of the population, or you decrease the top line. So one of those two things have to happen, right, to really affect the issue. I've always said, I've said before to a couple of people, and I've talked to developers, and I think they're on board with trying to come up with some remedies as well to address the situation. But at some point, if your house is, and to Mr. Chagnovic, I even mentioned this to you on the phone as well, if your house is flooding, the first thing you do when you fix the flooding is you turn off the water, right? You can't fix the flooding if the water is still protruding. And so there is some validity to that sort of analogy. The question is, how do we turn off the water, and at what rates? Do we turn it completely off? Is it a drip? While we mitigate with buckets of water that are scooping the water out of the tub? So something meaningful has to happen certainly over the next few weeks if this thing is delayed, but long term to address the school capacity issue. Redistricting alone will not solve it, and here's why, because there's no political will to some extent, not necessarily with the council because we don't control that, but if you really want to spread the high schools across the spectrum, you're going to migrate students that are in specific neighborhoods to schools that are completely out of their community. And so most parents just won't accept that. They just won't, because you're going to have 1,000 people in here literally trying to testify. You can do portions of it, but it still won't address the problem. So so that's one solution you have to do. But redistricting will certainly help. You certainly have to build at a faster rate when it comes to the schools to catch up with it. You got to do some toning down of the population increase for the school. All those things have to happen to really solve the problem. If they aren't all happening, then we're just kicking the can down the road. We're just playing with it, and we're never seriously going to address it. So this isn't to say, particularly this particular bill, but just to say that I do believe it's our duty or responsibility as the leaders in the county, the school board, as well as the county executive, to make some inroads into this process that everybody can get on board with, and that serves the needs of everybody here, but still addresses the population issues in the school system specifically. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr.
I'm going to say one last thing. I want to chime in on what Mr. Smith said. I like to use the foundation that has a leak in it. So we turn around, and what we do is we got water coming through the basement wall, and now we figured out we're going to get B-Dry to come over there and fix the leaky basement wall, when we should have just went outside the house and seen that the gutter wasn't connected or the sidewalk was leaning. So the thing that just kind of stirs me up more than anything is that I proposed legislation that took away all upzoning in North County until the general development plan was done. Just for that reason, because now we want to turn around and spend taxpayer money to build schools when we could have turned around and prevented it by just doing responsible development in Anne Arundel County. So now what we do is reckless development. We just turn around and we allow upzoning in areas like Pasadena, going from an R1 to an R15, and nobody says anything. And Pasadena is nothing but a nightmare as far as travel, but we just put one house per acre to 15 houses per acre because of certain people know certain people. Let's call it what it is. okay? So if we really cared about the development in this county, we'd have turned around and we would have did a moratorium on all upzoning in North County. We're not saying you can't build, but whatever your designation is for that property, that's it. If it's R1, that's what you're going with. If you want to go farther up the road to R10 or R15, then let's wait until the general development plan's done so we got a comprehensive look of what's going on instead of this piecemeal garbage. And then we wouldn't turn around and be saying, okay, wow, let's go ahead and build some more schools. And of course, at the taxpayers' money because developers already pay enough. To me, that's just reckless, just downright reckless. And I say once again, if we can put a moratorium on South County, then you need to do it on North County till everybody is on the same page to look which way the growth that this county is going in and to stop digging in the taxpayers' money all the time for more schools and start digging into developers' pockets for money. That's the way I feel about things.
Mr. Chair.
And that's all I'm going to say.
Mr. Smith.
So this isn't a takeaway from his point. I'm simply saying we were behind on the school construction 15, 20 years ago. I'm not saying that who pays for it. I'm just saying that we still should have had more schools 15 years ago if we want to keep our class sizes down, if we want to keep reasonably sort of attended schools. My suggestion, just like I mentioned last week, Howard County has 12 high schools. They have half our population, and Arundel County has 12 high schools, and we have twice the population. So it's just simple math. I'm not saying arguing who's paying for it or not. I'm just saying we still need to build more schools because we were deficient 15 years ago. So that's my argument. Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Prusky.
I just want to follow up on the comments as well. I remember serving on the school board where I actually took several votes on redistricting, and I still have people that hate me, but that's fine. But Mr. Smith, you have to do it. But also to follow up, there are folks that ask for an elected school board. And I remind the public, we have an election coming up, and that should be the questions asked to the candidates. You know, about where you stand on development, where you stand on schools, because they're going to be representing an elected position, which was changed versus appointed. So we have to look at that as well. I think people forget that that body, as we heard Mr. Arbogast and others come forward about, you know, concerns that come from the council, we can't do anything. That they're their own independent body, and they need to be held accountable as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that being said, to quote a phrase, let's open up the public hearing, please. Anyone would like? Do we have sign up? I'm sorry. Sign up for this. Mr. Johnson, Mr. Reel, Mr. Greenfeld, Mr. Spear Lancaster, Mr. Katz. I think we have room for all of you up here. Mr. Johnson, we can start with you if you'd like. Please, name and address, please, for the record. I've been forgetting to ask people to do that. I'm sorry.
No problem, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Matt Johnston, 1639 Chesapeake Lane, Edgewater, Mayo. I don't have as much gusto as our former chairman, Mr. Grasso. I appreciate your passion. I do have as much passion for the issue, though. It just, as I was reading this bill and talking to other residents in Mayo, the concept came into my mind, just you do not build a house until you buy the desks and hire the teachers. I mean, it's just that simple. There are no silver bullets. I completely agree with everything that's been said. And I would encourage you, if this isn't the silver bullet, then just continue the conversation, and you'll have a lot of support from the Mayo area. I can't speak for everyone, but I can speak for some of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Reel, good evening again.
Yes, Gordon Reel, 1210 Bayview Court. Further introduced myself as a registered professional engineer with the state of Maryland, since retired, specializing in instrument and control. Mr. Smith made a kind of graph with his bare hands like we use, and we would never use a set point of 100% before we began applying some control. So moving this to 95% is certainly a step in the right direction. I heartily endorse this bill. Was delighted to read it in the Capitol. On my last few seconds, Mr. Grasso, I joined you in having a job which I would have gladly done without pay for 51 years. But my employer never found out. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Reel. Mr. Greenfeld.
John
Good evening.
Greenfeld, evening, Maryland Building Industry Association. First, some context. There's one jurisdiction in the state of Maryland that has a school capacity threshold at less than 100%. That's Washington County. There are 7 over 100%, and I think that leaves us with 3 at 100%, and 10 that have no APFO tests at all. So you would be an extreme outlier, and I do think the state of Maryland would take that into account when looking at school dollars. But this is the third time we're here. Nothing's changed. There's no fiscal study, the budget impacts, no economic study, no action on task force recommendations, no grandfathering provision, no action to redistrict the schools. We are at 86% overall utilization. That's very low statewide. This bill will not take a single student out of a single school. It won't build a single new seat. I will note that class sizes, as Mr. Grasso mentioned, are more of an issue of funding and how many teachers we have than capacity. You can have an underfunded school that has large class sizes that also at 50, 60, 70% utilization, so they're not the same. But what it will do is create a near-building moratorium, cost millions a year in budgetary and non-budgetary costs, likely result in cuts to county services, county employees, probably tax increases, and it will cut a great revenue generator to build schools, which is our impact fees that developers already are paying. So, you know, before this bill passes, we'd like to see a fiscal study, we'd like to see grandfathering, we'd like to see action on some of the task force recommendations. It sounds like we'll have it. In particular, to your point, Councilman Pruski, if you want to hold the school board accountable, maybe we could do an adjacency test that says if there's adjacent school with capacity left over, that the school will remain open until the school board does its job. My understanding is they haven't redistricted in a comprehensive way since anyone can remember, so that seems an abdication of a responsibility to me. But until we take all those steps and decide that it is in fact developers that are solely responsible, I don't think this bill is ready for prime time.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Mr. Spear Lancaster, name and address, please. We know who you are.
Hello, thank you very much. My name is Spear Lancaster. I'm at 1188 Bacon Ridge Road, Crownsville, Maryland. I hadn't intended to speak until I got here and found out that this was on the agenda, and I just want to share some things with you. As you know, we started our first school here in Anne Arundel County in 2005, and we've been stuck at the same place, same amount of students, and we've not been allowed to expand. But in 2011, we went to Prince George's County, and we rented a building, started a 6 through 12, and it grew so fast, we had 5 portables outside a year ago to handle the overflow. And this year, we bought a piece of property, and we hired an architect, and we hired a builder, and we built an 80,000 square foot state-of-the-art high school. It opened this August, and as a matter of fact, we're going to have an open house on December the 12th at 1 o'clock if you want to come see a real state-of-the-art school. Not one dime of county or state money was spent. I'm going to repeat that. Not one dime of county or state money was spent. We built that school out of our own funds, own bond money, and it is really, really a first-class building. We've got 3 other schools in Prince George's County. 3 of them are in buildings that we have arranged the bond money for and negotiated the contracts and opened them up ourselves. We're also going to open a 5th school, which will give us a total of 6 schools this August, because we've been authorized to do a K through 5 in Upper Marlboro, Maryland. So we are quite capable of building schools, and we're quite capable of managing schools. We've got the best achievement gap record in the county, in both Anne Arundel and in Prince George's County. Prince George's County, of our 5 schools, most of them have 95% minority.
Mr. Lancaster, I'm sorry, I have to cut you off, but thank you for giving us that report, and see you December 12th at 1 o'clock. Thank you very much. Yes, Mr.
One
Smith.
quick question. What's the size of that school you just built?
80,000 square feet.
How many students can it support?
We're going to max out around 850.
What was the cost of it?
Under $20 million. $250 a square foot. In Anne Arundel
How big
County-
is the parcel was it on?
The parcel's on, it's only about 4 acres.
Okay.
We couldn't put a football field, but we've got a state-of-the-art gym.
Check.
And I'll tell you, it's all wood floors. You'd have to see it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Gorgeous.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Thanks again, Mr. Lancaster. Mr. Katz,
Yes.
name and address, please, again.
David Katz, 1931 Pendennis Drive. I think this legislation is a mistake. Going back to the flood in the basement analysis, you have 2 holes that are flooding your basement. And what you're doing is you're super focused on one hole, plugging it, but you're ignoring another hole. So what happens? It floods a little slower, but it still floods. This does not fix the problem. If you look at the 7,000 lots that have kind of come online since the economic downturn, ironically, you have 7,000 new students that have been added to the system. But if you look at building permits and where you're seeing increased capacity, it's not an exact match. Sure, there are submarkets in the county where you're seeing development that's adding to the schools, but there are also several submarkets within the county where this is a demographic shift. This is, multi-generational housing. And this legislation does not address how to fix that. One question I have is, in my mind, this legislation is to control land use and to stop growth. Now, our county bonds are issued based off of a certain growth rate. The repayment ability, is based off of a certain growth rate of the county. What happens to the value of our county bonds when we cut off growth? Well, you got to fund the government in other ways. So you got to raise taxes. And the same people that are going to be complaining about overcrowded schools are going to be coming out complaining about their high taxes as a result. So, look, I just conclude by saying, we're lucky to be here. This is a very strong local economy. And, with it, we've got wage stability, employment stability, access to the best resources. Let's not stop that. Let's not halt that. Let's come up with something to fix the school issue, but let's not enact a measure that stops growth and hurts our local economy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Katz. Thank you, gentlemen. Anybody else want to come down and testify? Thank you all. Yeah, let's make this last call, so. Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Powell, you want to begin, sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations on your appointment. I want to thank, actually, as ironic as this, Elliot Powell, Whitehall Development, 164 Conduit Street. I want to thank Mr. Grasso for bringing this topic up. As controversial as it is, it needs to be discussed. We definitely have a problem. I came here to talk a little bit about facts and figures. I know Mr. Smith is keen on that, and so if I could indulge you. I prepared a map chart. Some of you have seen this. This is a simple kind of rendition of what, do I have it upside down? Thank you, Mr. Tremont. It shows, I was good enough to put it in Christmas colors, but it shows in red the area that is closed to development, schools that are currently closed, both directly and indirectly in the 2019 school chart, plus the impact of a 95% bill. It closes about 80% of Anne Arundel County, closed to development, and it's pretty staggering to me. There are 48 out of 80 elementary schools closed under the 2019 chart with a 95% impact. That's 60% of the elementary schools are closed. 10 out of the 19, or 53% of the middle schools are closed, and 5 out of the 12 high schools, or 42% of the high schools are closed. Now, a closed school isn't a school that necessarily is overcapacity. A closed school can be a school that is closed because it's in a feeder system. The high school's closed, but the middle school could be open and the elementary schools can be closed. So it's a little misleading if you just looked at kind of closed schools, because really there are a lot of schools that are closed to development that are open, but because they had capacity, but they can't be closed. And I thought I'd share those numbers with you too. So 25 out of 80 of the elementary schools are open, but yet they're closed because they're in the feeder system. 6 out of the 19 middle schools are closed, and of course it doesn't.
Thank you, Mr. Powell. I'm sorry. Yes, sir. You're.
Wayne Newton with Messick and Associates. I'm here to represent myself personally as a Anne Arundel County resident and a 30-year land development engineer in Anne Arundel County. I see this bill as another attempt that we've had this discussion for 30 years of there's an issue with not enough school capacity. Years ago, there were fees developers paid to build schools. And I think a similar process needs to come back. Maybe not as just a fee, but we never seem to fix the problem. This random reduction of 5% isn't going to fix the problem. It's going to extend the problem. And as Mr. Katz said, he said it very well. If you shut the school construction down, developments are still going to occur. They're just going to occur somewhere else. Howard County, Montgomery County, Baltimore County, developers are going there. They're taking their tax dollars with them. They're taking their impact fee dollars with them. And you're cutting off the funding source. I think the dual flooding analogy was very good. Yes, there's development that's adding school capacity, but it's a minute piece to the multi-generational housing that he mentioned. I think the appropriate thing to do here is to pull this back, take a look at it, and look at what the workshop did a year ago. And let's find a real solution to build schools and increase our capacity instead of shutting down our funding source. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Yes, sir. Name and address, please. There you go.
Okay, thank you. My name's Robert Ian Smith. I live at 1487 Chatham Court in Crofton, Maryland. I'm here on behalf of Crofton First. We are a smart growth group that monitors development and looks for basically smart growth along the Route 3 corridor in Croftons and Gambrels. I'm basically out here on behalf of our membership to support this bill. We think it's a very important tool in terms of helping the county infrastructure keep pace with growth. And in fact, actually, if you will allow me, we put an online petition to members through not just through our own members, but throughout the county. And within 5 days, I've had 184 signatures that were basically enthusiastically in support of that. So if I could share that with the council, that'd be great. Basically, and then everybody that we've heard from our membership have been very much on board with this and want to see this happen. So. From what we understand, this is a good bill. It's like someone said, it's not a silver bullet, but it's at least a good step in the right direction. And a lot of parents from our membership have expressed frustration, and I feel this is at least an attempt to do so. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Mr. DeVito, good evening.
Good evening. Eric DeVito, Millersville, Maryland. Congratulations, new chair.
Thank you.
Mr. Grasso, I assume when you said we'd be doing backflips, they wouldn't be backflips of joy, I'm guessing, from your future bills. And I guess I would caution you, I hear you going after the 6-year waiting list. I'd encourage you to speak with Ms. Tate, because that's been highly litigated in the courts, and that law is pretty sound. So if you're attempting to go down that path, I would strongly encourage you to do your homework first. You know, I've heard a lot of things tonight, and having done work in this county for a number of years, like David and Elliot, I've had a lot of experience with these things. I was on the APF task group. I was on the impact fee study task group. And to say these fees don't match up with what developers are supposed to say is flat wrong. There are studies that have set the fees that we pay right now. They're based on data. They're based on real life. They're not based on just the thoughts of the day. So these impact fees we pay, actually, the development community would argue they're too high. But I know no one else would agree with that. I know that Mr. Shagnovics has extreme confidence that school funding would not be affected by going to 95%, but I think if you ask him, he can't tell you of any example where he's certain that that wouldn't happen, because no one else does it that way. I think the Washington County example, that was just for elementary school only, if I'm not mistaken. But again, it's not like the big 5 counties. Baltimore County, Howard County, Anne Arundel don't do it that way. So we don't know what would happen if you go to 95%, and I personally think it would hurt. You know, lastly, building houses is no different than any other industry. You make steel, you make cars. the demand is there and you supply to meet the demand. It's not the other way around. Builders aren't building houses and creating demand. Demand is there, builders are building houses. And what's going to happen is if those people are going to still want to buy houses, and what they're going to do is they're going to be age-restricted houses, which don't need schools. People are going to empty out of those, go to age-restricted, and then you're going to still have a school problem. This is not the answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeVito. Thank you very much. Mr. Platt, good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Peruka, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations, and Mr. Walker also, congratulations. David Platt, 419 Ferry Point Road, Annapolis. I've been practicing law in Arundel for 28 years and was a planner before that with the state of Maryland. And I'm here to testify against the bill because, as many folks have already stated, this is really not targeted at solving the issue. New development can be a source of overcrowding of the schools, but let's take the example of Tyler Heights Elementary School in the city of Annapolis. Tyler Heights was overcrowded, over capacity in a very short period of a few years to like 140% of capacity, and there were no new building permits issued in the district. What was happening in that area were that existing homes, many of them rental homes, were suddenly being converted into accommodating not one family with a child or one child, but 2 or 3 families. And so demographics can have as much or as greater an impact on overcrowding of schools as other factors, and obviously redistricting, trying to utilize capacity when there's capacity in the system to make sense is a huge factor also. The city of Annapolis, when they considered the issue, and they adopted a school APF ordinance recently, and I can give you a copy of it. They studied the issue extensively, had hearings before the city council on it, and they adopted a APF system that has 105% state-rated capacity for elementary and middle schools, and 120% state-rated capacity for the high schools. And I think that's an acknowledgement that there are other factors that are at play. It's not simply new development that is driving the overcrowding of the schools. The last thing I would say is that actually adopting this bill undermines the general development plan, because think about it. The general development plan is trying to channel development into targeted growth areas, into areas that have infrastructure, into priority funding areas identified by the state. And what is the effect of this bill on that? Are you not going to utilize and target the growth into the area?
Thank you, thank you, Mr. Platt. I apologize for having to cut you off. Thank you, gentlemen. That was last call, so that was last call. The public hearing is now closed. Madam Secretary, would you please read? Oh, yeah, the title of Bill 9217.
Bill 9217, Subdivision and Development, Adequate Public Facilities, School Utilization Chart.
Okay, is there any further
Mr. Chair.
discussion? Yeah. Mr. Smith.
If Mr. Chagnovic can come back up, please. Is anyone aware of who created this APF chart as far as that shows the percent of utilizations at the school? Have you seen this? Can you hand this to him just to make sure we're on the same page? Actually, can I get you one? I gave you one. No, this, the utilization. Right. I need some comments on that. Yeah, can you show him that? This, hey, do you have a document? That's fine. That's fine.
Alex Shaknovich, Chief Operating Officer for the record. This was this chart, this exhibit, was prepared by the school district's planning office.
Is that correct? The schools that are closed and open in that spreadsheet? Say it again.
Is this a bill 9917 you're asking questions about?
Yeah. Yeah.
That is scheduled for public hearing on January 2nd.
Huh? Are we talking about 9917?
No.
Is there an issue?
I'm sorry. I'm jumping the gun. I am jumping the gun.
You are very enthusiastic, but it's not
mistake. She caught that.
It's not January 2nd. Thank you.
Well, the reason I bring it up is because it has impacts on the 95%. It really does. And so if you look at the chart, the reason I wanted you to confirm, because I'm trying to confirm for myself, not the bill, but whether or not the utilizations are correct.
Well, maybe you can provide that for the second.
Check. And So on the 2nd, if you can come back, or whichever day, actually, I would prefer you come back at the next meeting, because if this bill is delayed for 2 weeks, depending on what happens with those amendments, it may or may not be voted on at the next meeting. So I really want to have that conversation with you, but I want it to be public as well, in addition to a private conversation, because what I saw in there was 6 schools that fall between 95% and 99%. Because if they're at 100, they're closed anyway. So it doesn't matter because they're closed. So from at 95%, 96, 97, 98, 99, I saw 6 schools. And I wanted to know if that was incorrect. And so I won't sort of hold you to that right now so that you can get back and validate it. But if you could certainly review it just to make sure that that chart and utilization percentage is correct, I greatly appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you. Anything further? Yeah, Mr. Grasso. Yes, sir.
I wanted to kind of comment on some of the comments that were made. First of all, the issue that, our tax dollars are going to go somewhere else, the part that's really got me amazed is that there isn't any benefit here. The taxpayers are paying for you to make your money. That's really what it boils down to. Better than half of the county budget right now goes to the Board of Education. I'm not saying that you can't move forward with your development. All I'm saying is you pay for the schools. That's what I'm saying. The comment I also made was that some people might say we pay too much money for impact fees. Well, I'm going to give you a generalization, and what I see is proof behind what I'm making a statement. Right now, the county's paying $8,100 or $8,200 county's portion to the school system. And the 2 kids per household is $16,000 that's going out the door, okay? So you pay an obviously $10,000 or $15,000 for that building permit as an impact fee. Then we turn around and we assume that there's 2 people working in that household. Okay? We pick up a piggyback tax from those people of $2,000, $3,000 on each one of those people. So that's 6. All right? And then we turn around and we pick up the property tax is $3,000. Now, it sounds great the first year, but after the second year, $16,000 comes out of the taxpayers' pockets for your little project, okay? And all we're picking up now is $3,000 on the property tax, $2,000, $3,000 on a piggyback tax from Mr. and Mrs. that's living in a household, and then it becomes a financial deficit for Anne Arundel County from there on out, okay? And that's the reason why, folks, why your Board of Education is consuming most of the county money. And yet we're going to pay the police, the fire department, and everybody else out of it and fix your roads so that the developers can make their money and walk away happy, leaving you and me with the rest of the bills. The part that also gets me on top of all this is that I sit back and I say to myself, it's the thought, let's give fear that the world is going to come to the end and that people will move somewhere else. That's okay with me, all right? I'm not saying, once again, that you can't build. What I'm saying is it's responsive development. And when we turn around and we take property and go from an R1 to an R15 in a congested area, it doesn't make sense. You could stay at R1. If you want to turn around and build a development, go ahead. You pay for the public school system. We don't want your little cheesy $10,000, $15,000 impact fee because it's not enough to cover the expenses of what we're dealing with. It's not that I'm against development. I am for responsible development or rehabilitation or what's the word looking for, rejuvenating our communities where the infrastructure is already there. Mr. Plott made a comment and said, what about the school in Annapolis and how it is so overcrowded now and not one extra permit? There's always an exception to the rule, Mr. Plott, okay? But we don't use that one case as the guide or the gauge for everything else that is possibly going wrong. So that's all I'm going to say with that.
That being said, thank you. Mr. Pruski, did you have a
motion to hold to the next meeting?
I'll second.
Madam Secretary, what do we do? How do we proceed here?
I'll call the roll.
Call the roll for that. Thank you.
Mr. Trumbauer?
Aye.
Mr. Walker?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Grasso?
Aye.
Mr. Fink?
Aye.
Mr. Pruski?
Aye.
Mr. Peruka?
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. The motion to hold the vote on Bill 9217 to the next meeting is adopted.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please read the title of Resolution Number 4817.
My thing. Resolution number 4817, a resolution entitled Charter Amendment, Legislative Procedure, Notice of Amendments to Comprehensive Zoning Ordinances.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Trumbauer, you the sponsor?
I am. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We had quite a good conversation about this at the last meeting. For the minutes, I'll reflect, I think this is an awesome resolution. But I believe that the substantial conversation will be around an amendment that we'll hear in a short time. So include my comments.
Thank you. So there is no public hearing, so let's move to the amendment. Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. Administration, I apologize.
No,
Brian.
you're
Excuse
correct. We move to the amendment. We don't have any more comments.
Okay. Madam Secretary, would you read amendment number 1?
Amendment number 1. This amendment provides for a 5-day posting requirement prior to vote on a comprehensive zoning ordinance, adds a posting requirement, and adds a public hearing on amendments to a comprehensive zoning ordinance for any zoning change amendment to a comprehensive zoning bill.
Thank you. Mr. Walker?
I have a motion to
Oh,
adopt,
excuse me.
so I'd like to move the motion to
I'll
adopt.
second that.
Thank you.
I'll tag team.
Thank you.
Mr. Walker?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We did debate this at the last meeting, and I'm inclined to support the resolution, hopefully with the adoption of this amendment to it. What this does has already been sort of read, but to go into a little more detail, some of us on the dais have been here through the comprehensive rezoning process, and some have not. The first section of this amendment would require the administration. So what we were talking about up until this point in time is a resolution that would require a sign to be posted on the property should a council member wish to change the zoning, which in most cases is upzoning, a piece of property in order to give the community the ability to understand and know what's getting ready to happen with that piece of property. So first I would like to, this first section would address the amendments to a comprehensive rezoning bill that are put forward by the administration. So the administration, the process for those of you who aren't familiar with the comprehensive rezoning process is a bill comes down from the administration with certain properties included in that bill that offer a upzoning of some kind in those properties. So the administration is suggesting a series of changes in zoning on parcels that are located in the county. Now, for those of you that have not been through this, I will say the Office of Planning and Zoning did a spectacular job this last go-around. I think a number of my colleagues will agree that they clearly laid out for the public online a map that showed where each individual parcel that was going to be upzoned. They had a little dot on it. You could click on the dot. When you clicked on the dot, the application was PDF. It was available for somebody to download and see who owned the property or who was making the application, what the current zoning of the property is, what the proposed zoning change was. It was very much a transparent process to a certain extent. And I say to a certain extent because what happens is the public who is not paying attention to what we're doing here at the council, maybe they pay attention to it through the newspaper occasionally, but for the most part, they live their lives until they're driving down the road and they see a variance sign or an application for a special exception sign on the side of the road, and they say, hey, wow, something's getting ready to happen on that parcel. I probably should make a call or an inquiry. Those people typically aren't the ones who are studying the website and looking to see the bills that are coming down and try to understand what zoning changes are being proposed in the comprehensive bill. So this first section of the amendment would require that if the administration, as the administration introduces a piece of legislation to the council that changes the zoning on parcels within each of our districts, that is proposed by the administration as a change, that they are required to post a sign on those properties as well. So not just the amendments, Mr. Trumbauer's initial resolution proposed that just the amendments from the council be required to post. I'm suggesting in this amendment that we also require the administration to post a sign on the properties, or require the property owner to post a sign on the properties that are being changed in the initial bill that's brought down, because that alerts the community. That alerts the people who are driving by that parcel or live near that parcel. The people that aren't necessarily studying the website on a day-to-day basis to find out what bills are coming down or what zoning changes are being made. The second part of the amendment addresses what I think is some of the concern that I heard expressed after the last comprehensive rezoning process that we went through. And that is an opportunity for public to testify and weigh in on a change that's proposed by a council member. There were a number of amendments that were made to that bill, ones that I made myself on a bill and was undecided up until almost the time I walked out onto the dais as to whether or not I was going to put that bill in based on different feedback from different parties. But as you know, our process at the council has always been that we adopt amendments or changes to a bill that don't allow for public testimony or a public hearing as part of the process. So the second section of this amendment would put in the charter that when an amendment is brought forward, the night that it's brought forward, there allows for public testimony. The public is allowed to, not only now they have the notice of the regular process that we have online, but they'll also have a sign being located at the property that will give them an idea of what is getting ready to happen here at the council, that the zoning on that property is getting ready to change, and it gives them an opportunity to come down here as the amendment's introduced, and it gives them the ability to testify on the record whether or not they support or oppose that change in zoning prior to the adoption of that amendment. So we get to hear from the public. And so that is the changes that I'm proposing in this amendment. If you have questions about it, I'm happy to try to answer those. I know it might not be as clear to some of you who had not gone through the comprehensive rezoning process, so I'm happy to take questions.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Trumbauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Walker. I mean, you clearly put some effort into what you wanted to do to this after the last meeting. So I'm supportive in concept for both of these parts. I mean, the only, I don't want to call it reluctance, but I mean, the only hesitation I have, I had deliberately crafted my original charter amendment to be as clean and simple as possible, with the idea that would put the requirement in place, and then subsequent legislation, should this pass and then be approved by the voters, would work out the details. So now, you know, we're prescribing a little bit more in the charter rather than in legislative code. So, you know,
Could I just say for a second that in order to allow the public input on those amendments, it required, it would require this level of detail, because we don't have that process outlined in our charter currently, where people can testify on amendments.
Right, and that would be unique to legislation. I mean, no other legislation allows for that, which
I would argue that this is unique legislation that only happens once every 10 or now 8 years.
I'm not questioning that, and if this was in place the last go around, I think it would have made a big difference. So, I guess I have a question for Ms. Tate, for Ms. Tate. So if we presume for a second that amendment number 1 passes, and then we further presume that the resolution passes, can you refresh my memory on what the next step is in the charter amendment process? It needs to be drafted for the ballot at that point.
Well, there's a question included in the resolution, and that would be forwarded to the Office of Law to craft the ballot question. It has to be certified before the first Monday of August in 2018. So there's a lot of time in between what's happening tonight, and the final drop dead date.
Which gets to my next point, or I guess question. So again, if we make the presumptions that the amendment passes and the resolution passes, if sometime between now and August someone said, well, actually this needs to be wordsmithed or this needs to be changed, would we just pass a new resolution that would overwrite this, or?
You have the ability to go back and change this language or change the ballot language before. That's something we did.
I thought so.
In the last election cycle. That is an option for you up until, let's be conservative and say, don't wait past June.
Well,
if you're going to do that. So
I'd like to get this taken care of much in advance of that.
But you still have a lot of time.
Okay.
Thanks.
Well, that alleviates some of my concern, and then obviously I'd be interested in the administration's opinion.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Fink.
Just got a question from the sponsor on the public hearing. I mean,
is that we have, you have Amendment 1, then you open it up to public hearing. Everybody there gets 2 minutes. Then you come back to Amendment 2, open it back up, public hearing. I mean, from what I remember, that comprehensive rezoning process, which I remember well, is one of, pretty brutal. These bills went all the way to the last day. It seems like we voted on, I think we broke it down to 3 bills, and they went the entire term. And many of these bills had amendments. I mean, it was like the budget. I mean, we had 30, 40 amendments on every bill. And it just seems if you had to open up every single amendment to a public hearing, I mean, you very well could be here. I mean, the bills would be expiring.
Well,
I would just say in response to that, people could come at the next hearing. The way that we had it set up this last time was how we normally handle our bills, right? So if, in the case where we adopted amendments along the way, which we did do, there were people that would come at the next meeting and say, I object to that amendment or that change that you implemented in the last meeting, but I don't know that the
But that happens
level
now,
of
right?
people, I'm sorry?
That happens now.
Correct. I'm just saying I don't know that the level of people would be somehow increased and testify. Why would you think that there would, or assume that there would be more people to come and testify?
If you have 5 amendments, does this mean you have to have 5 public hearings?
Say tonight we had 20 amendments on the bill.
There would be a hearing before each amendment.
So there'd be 20, there'd be 21.
20 opportunities, 21 opportunities for
'Cause you
people
do
to
it
come down
on
and
the-
testify. But you're going to have people that are testifying, mostly probably will be for or against, would be people that are interested in that property. Not everybody that's going to come is going to testify on every amendment.
I understand, but I mean, this could really bog down the whole process. I mean, some of these bills that had 30 and 40 amendments, I mean, midnight, everything.
They did over a period of 3 months.
Right, but midnight, everything stops. There's other business going on. Now, all of a sudden, one night, you've got, 5 bills. That's 5 public hearings, and you got 20 amendments. You're at 25 public 25 public hearings.
Yeah, it would definitely be a long council meeting. There's
you
no
want
question.
everybody to
but it's-
speak, but you could just completely stop business for quite some time doing it that way. My only thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Fink. Mr. Walker, anything else?
I would just add that this is, an issue that I believe that I've heard from people about with regards to transparency, which is why I felt like it was necessary. So,
Thank you. One of the, may I just ask you a question? One of the worries that I have is the whole idea of well, first of all, I wasn't here the last time, for the record. What do you say to the idea of us giving up as a body, surrendering authority or surrendering what we have the ability to do, what we've been elected to do?
I mean, I don't see how this is surrendering. We are still able to offer amendments. I mean, the alternative, I'll just tell you, one of the other alternatives that we looked at was extending the life of the bill. So instead of the normal cycle that we have for our bills, extending that by a couple of extra or additional meetings, allowing for a meeting where there weren't amendments allowed, but would allow a hearing opportunity for people to come down and testify that they want something removed. Like an extra hearing, basically, where there wouldn't be no amendments allowed, but removal, basically, provision allowed.
So if I just summarize the problem in the way I've kind of heard it expressed, the problem is that there were last minute changes that people didn't have adequate time to complain about if they wanted to, or to have input. I shouldn't say complain, to have input in.
That's correct, and that would apply mostly to the second half of my amendment. The first half really goes to the point of people driving down the road and not knowing that there's a comprehensive rezoning bill that's happening that's changing the character of the properties that are located in their community, and by implementing a sign requirement on those properties that are being changed, the zoning's changed, it gives them an opportunity to contact us as their council representatives to weigh in on whether or not they feel like that zoning change should be made.
Gives them a heads up. Okay, I got it. Thank you very much. You're welcome. Appreciate it. Administration?
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, Bernie Marzick, County Executive's Office with me at the table. Phil Hager, who actually I just asked, this is going to be his first time to speak at the county council meeting as planning and zoning officer.
Had to wait all night.
Unfortunately, we just got this amendment tonight, so I would ask at the outset if it's possible to hold this amendment for a vote until we give a kind of full consideration to it until the next council meeting. The one issue that came to mind right away is on, I guess first, we're all for the transparency aspect that everyone's going for with this. On part one of this is that if you do, if in comprehensive rezoning, let's say you're changing the name of R1 to B2, you would then have to post every single property in the county, which could be thousands and thousands of postings if you reclassify what those titles are. So if for whatever reason the zoning process or the council and the through the comprehensive zoning process decide to change just the name of it, it's still one house per acre, but if the name would change, you would have to post every single one of those properties. So if at some point you change that.
I mean, that would be an easy fix, I think.
Right, so I think that you might want to look at that, and that was just something that came to mind right away, but I know Mr. Hager had some concerns.
Mr. Hager, welcome to the council.
First.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening. Congratulations on your election as chair, Mr. Vice Chair. Congratulations to you as well. Thank you for this opportunity, and I would echo the comments that Mr. Marzek made with regards to transparency. I was actually pleased to see this resolution introduced, and the Office of Planning and Zoning supports Mr. Trumbauer's resolution as it was originally proposed. The proposed amendments do give us cause for some concerns, respectfully, Mr. Walker. A comprehensive rezoning is deemed as having a degree of legitimacy that other types of processes don't always enjoy, which is why you definitely want to make sure that notice is required for those, and that those types of changes enjoy the full benefits of public engagement. The concern that we had initially with this resolution being brought up was the concern that this very thing might become what came about as a result of this process. One of the things that gives people comfort about the comprehensive rezoning process versus other types of rezoning processes is the fact that it is the direct product of the GDP. When you go through a comprehensive plan, it's comprehensive because it's geography-wide, it's public participation throughout, and it interrelates all the different land use elements together so that what you end up with is truly a comprehensive product. You then take that land use map that came out of that comprehensive product and you compare that to your existing zoning that's in place at the time that the comprehensive plan is adopted. And I would underscore the fact also to you that that plan is adopted by you through another public engagement opportunity, through a hearing process. So then you compare those two documents and you identify the delta. Where is the land use changes that came about as a result of the development and adoption of the land use plan different from the zoning? In some cases, it may be higher density. In some cases, it may be lower density. In some cases, it may not be substantive at all. As Mr. Marzek identified, we might change the name of the RA zone to resource conservation. There's many other things that could happen as a result of that. So traditionally, as prescribed in the land use article of the Annotated Code of Maryland, by process and by the fact that it's done this way in every other jurisdiction in Maryland, the comprehensive rezoning recommendation does not require individual posting of property. Where you would come up with amendments to the plan-derived changes, that's what I think was the focus of Mr. Trumbauer's resolution, and I think that's where you would see unreserved support from our office with regards to that, because anything that's coming about as a result of a change at that point was not a change that enjoyed the full support of the public and the public processes that are embodied in the GDP development. And so that is where you would get a breakdown in the public engagement opportunity that you would be wanting to make sure that you captured. not the changes that were recommended as a result of the plan development. So with respect, I would encourage us to perhaps either hold this bill or perhaps consider another methodology for capturing this, and that we would focus only on those changes that came about as a result of people bringing things in after the fact. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hager. I appreciate it. Mr. Walker?
Yeah, Mr. Hager, I appreciate your comments, and I agree with you with the way you described things. I would just simply add that some of what Mr. Grasso pointed out earlier, that there are changes that are done sometimes that are political, that come through the county executive's office, through the planning and zoning process. Even though they came through that process through your shop, they were still done outside of maybe the general development plan guidelines. And in a perfect world, I hear what you're saying, but I do also recognize the fact that there is a politician who you serve and represent, and when that person, or he or she, directs you to put something into the piece of legislation, you would be beholden to that person to do that, regardless of whether it fit up with the general development plan or not. And so I saw that myself in the last piece of legislation that we had in front of us back in 2011. Saw it happen. Not to say that the next county executive would or wouldn't do that, but I just saw that, and I think that's why I'm suggesting that the posting for any property change zoning-wise, whether it be from the council or from the administration, be posted so that the public understands what's getting ready to happen and the changes that are going to happen on that property in their community.
Mr. Hager?
I regret to have to say this at my first council meeting, but that would be a significant violation of my personal ethics as a professional, and I would believe that my staff would not feel that would be appropriate either. And I don't believe that I would be comfortable doing such a thing or remaining at the helm of an office that would be part of something like that.
I appreciate that. I do. And I certainly am not challenging your ethical character.
If I may, thank you very much for the question and the answer. The sentiment might be the suggestion has been made to hold this.
I'm fine with holding it, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Trumbauer.
So the maker of the motion, or the maker of the amendment, is certainly willing to hold. I'm willing to hold. I would like some sort of commitment that the maker of the amendment, myself as the sponsor, and planning and zoning and the administration would have a chance to have a conversation the next 2 weeks. I really would like to get something together. I'd like to pass something. I know technically we have till August, but this is something that I wanted to get done well in advance of the crunch time, where we're going to have 20 other amendments to deal with for all sorts of topics. So if everybody has a good faith agreement that we'll find a few minutes to work this out, I'd be happy to hold this next meeting.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes, Mr.
One last question. I guess, Mr. Walker, are you saying that you're additionally looking at extending the timeline, or this was just option one? And
there was a couple options that we looked at, one of them which was extending the timeline. And I mean, frankly, I'd be open to that as well, as opposed to the hearing on each individual amendment. Just felt like this was the alternative that I liked better than the other one.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Then,
Mr. Chair.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr.
Real quick,
Smith.
Ms. Yeager, would you be open to a telephone call tomorrow with me?
Absolutely.
All right, thank you.
Do we need a motion to hold the bill?
Motion to hold.
And seconded.
Could you call the roll, Madam Secretary, call the roll on holding the bill?
Mr. Trumbauer?
Aye.
Mr. Walker?
Aye.
Mr. Smith? Aye. Mr. Grasso?
Aye.
Mr. Fink? Mr. Pruski?
Aye.
Mr. Peruka?
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. The motion to hold the vote on Resolution 4817 to the next meeting is passed.
Madam Secretary, may I, is it still possible for me, while we're still in session here, to add myself as a co-sponsor to Resolution 5217?
5217?
It was
Yes,
the
sir.
very first, it was back near the beginning. May I do that? Okay. Then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn, Mr. Chair.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Stand adjourned. Council is adjourned until December 18th, 2017.